All right, we are going to call meeting to order. It's 9 o'clock, and so we are going to get started. And we are going to start with roll call and introductions. I'm Krista Hewling from Jeffersonville, Chair. And do you want to start?
Peter Pelz from Woodbury.
Dan French, Secretary of Education.
Bill Mathis, Goshen.
Mark Perrin, Middlebury.
John Carroll from Norwich.
Stacy Weinberger, Burlington.
And we have our student member, Kyle, is actually at his locker. This is his school, so he'll be right back. He had to go grab something. Oliver Olson is on the road, and so is John O'Keefe. Those are our southern members. With the weather, they're a little bit delayed, but they are on their way, so they will be here. At this point, as we look at our agenda, is there any amendments to the agenda to be made? Seeing none, we are going to start first with a welcome from our hosts. And if we could have Superintendent Dirth come up, please. Thank you. And I really want to thank you, because when we were looking for a location, it was very hard when we say we want an auditorium size. We don't want to interfere with the school as much as possible. And you were gracious to come forward and host, and not only gracious, but really welcoming, and really trying to make this work and be a really positive experience, and even inviting students to come and perform for us at the end. So thank you. If you want to come and did you want to give a welcome? Okay.
Welcome everybody on this snowy day. I hope you made the trip well. Welcome to Maple Run. Welcome to BFA. I'm hoping everybody can hear me without a mic. Just a little history that some people were asking me before we started. BFA was actually a private school until 2004. And in 2004, it became public union school for Franklin Central. It was actually built in 1930. The building you're in here was 1930, and the money came from a person by the name of Hiram Bellows, who gave money to both St. Albans. His house was right here on this property, and he gave money to St. Albans and to Fairfax to have two BFAs. Now, if Ned Kirsch were here, he would tell you that they were the first BFA. But other than that, because I think they started early 1900s, he was a railroad person. He gave 250 shares of the Hudson Railroad to us. And with this, we created what you see. And there was still some money left, so where you're standing right now, which we call the Performing Arts Center, was actually redone 6 years ago, and we only had to do a $700,000 bond, because there's still money left from way back when that helped create the rest of this space. So again, welcome. I know you've got some powerful things that you'll be doing today, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you so much. It was so welcoming, because even if there was going to be a snow day, we were reassured that they were going to open the doors for us. So thank you for your hospitality. Thank you. All right, at this time we have public to be heard, and if there's anybody with public to be heard signing up on the stage, was everybody able to sign up that wanted to speak? All right, I'm just going to grab that. All right, so could we have first Jay Denault from Franklin come on up, please?
Good morning.
Morning.
It's been about 40 years since I've been in this building, having graduated in class of 73. It's kind of neat being back here again. I'm going to be brief. I just got one statement, I have a statement to make for you, and this is it. I'm from Franklin, and we are struggling with Act 46, as you well know. We've done everything that has been requested of us. Franklin meets every goal of the law. Year after year, all our students have excelled academically. We spend less than 92% of all Vermont schools, all other Vermont schools, and a forced merger will significantly increase our per pupil costs. Franklin is geographically isolated, and despite your repeated claims to the contrary, a forced merger will lead to the closure of our local school. Attached is a quote from Phil Scott. I ask you to please read it. I'm going to leave you a copy, in which he states, Franklin is an example of where the existing provisions of Act 46 do not always work the way lawmakers intended them to. He makes other quotes in there that I think you would be well advised to read, and I would appreciate it if you would read them. We developed a plan with our neighbors. We legally voted on our plan, and our communities unanimously supported it. A forced merger is a violent act against the legal voters of Franklin. You are committing a despicable act against everything we stand for as Vermonters. Thank you.
Next we have Alan. I know it's a little minefield up here, sorry. Thank you, Jay. Okay, thank you. Let's make sure with board members, we have 2 board members that are coming, yeah. Okay, Alan?
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Alan Willett from Stowe. Before I start, in your minutes, the Elmore Morristown Union, your abbreviation is wrong. It's EMUU, not EMU. Was hoping to be able to speak to the entire board. Is there any way that public comment can be delayed till everybody's here, or no?
So, I mean, honestly, they should be here any minute, and
Okay.
it's just time. I mean, yeah. Oh, you
Oh,
can't.
is this better?
Oh, I think, can you push it forward?
It says do not touch.
Oh, I think,
Is this better?
is that okay?
All right. Like I said last time, I hate speaking in public, and I was up late last night writing out at my computer screen what I was going to say and making sure it wouldn't be longer than 4 minutes. And then coming here this morning, I realized given the agenda, it doesn't really matter at this point. This is a couple-hour meeting. The time for decisions is past. This is more about dotting the i's and crossing the t's. So I guess I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the board members who read the Elmore Morristown Stowe proposal. Thank you. I was born in Vermont, as were my parents, as were my grandparents. Educated in Vermont, and had a very good experience in the Vermont education system. And I was just thinking about why was that? And I think it's because I had engaged role models pushing me to do better. In my instance, I was lucky because my parents valued education. And And I also had several teachers that pushed me to do more. And I think that is something that's important in the school systems. And I don't think it's something that can be solved through legislation. It needs to be, I don't know the right words, more collaborative to get kids on the right path right at the beginning. You know, for example, in our daughter's school, when they start kindergarten, they're paired up with a fifth grader for reading buddies. And I think that really helps. And I hope that it could become a focus once Act 46 is put away. Leave you with one final thought. If you have something, and I do not remember who said this to me growing up, but if you have something heavy you want to move, you can only get so far trying to breed a bigger horse. You're going to run up against some limitations there, and the best way to try to move something heavy is to get a team of normal horses working together. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ellen. And we have Erica Loomis. Morning.
I'm Erica Loomis from Stowe, and I first want to start out by thanking you all. This is a frustrating process. I know it's been long and hard and not easy, so we appreciate you, and I thank you for being on the board. You're making really tough decisions for our community. And also, I want to just thank you folks for being engaged and responding to numerous emails from our community, which we do appreciate. I spoke a couple weeks ago at the last meeting and mentioned that I have a daughter. I just wanted to point out that she's only 10 months old, so I actually don't have a daughter in the school system. But the last board meeting kind of moved me. I wanted to say thank you to Callahan, but she's not here. I hope my daughter can grow up to be like her and be involved. She had the courage to, bring up the discussion of EMU and Stowe, which I was very thankful for. And after that meeting, it seemed like the conversation needed to go on and board members had more questions. So I thought, what can I do to kind of help my community become more educated on this topic and be involved and be heard? So I was compelled to start a petition online on change.org, which I've never done before, so I apologize if you got too many emails about it. You kind of select decision makers at the top, so I selected board members and the secretary. So I'm here today just to present that petition on behalf of Elmore, Stowe, and Morristown. And the petition went live on Tuesday, November 20th, and we very quickly had over 500 signatures. So it was clear to me that my only regret in this process is that I waited too long to start the petition. So as of this morning, when I last checked and kind of cleaned it up, we officially had 1,094 community members from Stowe, Elmore, and Morristown that have signed the petition to stop the merger between EMU and Stowe. And I think this shows our communities are committed to seeing this process through to the end, and our community members want to be heard. Like I said, they just didn't know how. So given the existing facts from the petition, the supplemental letter, the AGS proposal, and then our presentation from two of our board members a couple of weeks ago, I'm just asking one more ditch effort, one last time, if you would reconsider the EMU and Stowe preliminary decision that you made on October 29th. And please agree with our other, 1,093, because I'm one of those that signed, and do not merge the two districts. It's very clear to me that our community members, based on that petition, really don't want to see this go through, and that remaining two separate districts of Emu and Stowe is in the best interest for all of our students. So I thank you and I appreciate your time.
Do you
Thank-
have a copy of the petition letter itself?
I do not have one with me, but I could,
It was emailed to you.
Please.
I
Yeah,
think it
you
was
have
emailed,
it.
but I could get one copied here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that was all we have for public comment, people signing up to be heard. So the next item on the agenda is the adoption of the default articles of agreement. And these are the articles that we've worked on for the last couple of meetings going through. So is there a motion that anybody would like to make?
I move that the board adopt the default articles of agreement prepared in connection with the board's final report of decisions and order and as presented to this meeting November 28th, 2018, with all edits made during the course of the meeting issued pursuant to Act 46, Section 10, Sub B.
Okay, so Mark made the motion. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Stacy. All right. So, and this is the default articles of agreement. Discussion or comments on the default articles?
Is Donna going to be present?
Donna is here, and those default articles we discussed at our last meeting and went through. If there's any other comments. Do you have a question
I can ask her directly, I think.
about the default articles? Do you want to do that now before you
Sure,
vote? Okay. So Donna, would you mind coming up? Good morning. And so, and Donna Russo
Savage from the Agency of Education.
any questions?
So Donna, I believe I know there's a local concern where I come from about the Articles Agreement as drawn up and the authority to close schools, whether that can be done at the local level in the first 2-year period or thereafter, in terms of just the way these current articles are written. Do you have any input on that?
The way these are currently written, there is a protection that's in place for 2 years, but then after that, it would be up to the local community to amend the articles in some way if they wanted to extend or the protections or have different protections.
And would that be in the Articles of Agreement as is currently drawn up? You're referring to that, that remains with the local community to make that decision? To close a school after 2 years?
After 2 years, statutory law kicks in. So unless the articles are amended to put in other kinds of, other kinds of procedures or protections.
So that statutory language does protect the local district?
Yes, the language in the statute is not terribly clearly written, but it does talk about the, what the authority of the electorate is and what the authority of the school boards are, and it comes down to that, that dynamic.
Donna, could you pull your microphone closer?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
And Peter, could you just clarify when you say local, are you talking
thought
about
you-
town
yes,
or the
yes,
larger
no,
district?
Oh, town, no, the
yeah,
town,
That's what I'm...
no, it would not be, I'm sorry, thank you for clarifying that. No, it is the voters of the entire district is what the statutory default will be at the end of these 2 years, unless the voters of the entire district amend these articles to include some other kind of procedure.
And they can amend that at any point. I mean, they can either change it within the short period of time that's allotted now or then do it thereafter.
Correct. There's the normal procedure for amendments, and then there's the Act 49 procedure for amending things very quickly.
And just one last question, and that would go back to each of the towns to vote
No, well, they're done at the local level, but because this is a single district, it is, the combined vote of the entire.
it'd be counted as a commingled.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? And I think really for the these default articles, that local areas should be able to go back and make this fit for them. And these are just the default, and it can always be changed. And it has that 90, do you want to just go over that 90-day process of the changing?
And I do know that I need to draft guidance for this. From a very, very high level, the 90-day process, there's a deadline that's of 90 days that was established in Act 49 to have very quick turnaround of some amendments so that those amendments could take effect when the district becomes operational on July 1st. So, but very little detail was given in that. So the Articles of Agreement that you have in front of you create a process that will allow that to occur within the 90 days, and that process would be that there will be a transitional body that is created that has two main duties. One is to warn some meetings until the initial board is elected. So it has the authority to warn a couple of different meetings, and the other is to put together the beginnings of what will eventually become the budget that the board will present to the voters. So this transitional board will warn a meeting for the entire electorate to vote whether to amend these articles. If a group is created by representatives of each of the merging, or by representatives of the merging districts, who get together and present those amendments. So if the merging districts appoint members to a body that we called in this document the Amendment Committee, that Amendment Committee would meet with the public, would decide whether and in what ways that body wants to present amendments. If it comes up with something that it wants to present, then the transitional board is required to warn that meeting, and then there is the vote of the entire electorate of the whole new district whether or not to amend in that way. If all of that is done within the 90-day period, then those amendments would take effect on July 1st. Or actually could even be before if they have affected the way in which board members were appointed to the board.
All right. Bill. And you might want to get closer to the mic.
An old question, but how does this intersect with the VSA, VSBA, looking at the rules that should be voted by the public and those that should not?
This doesn't intersect at all. This follows what current law is and reflects the concerns that state board members made. If that is something that they are doing, then that's something that they're currently doing. This isn't trying to change law except to the extent that it gives protections to small districts that don't exist otherwise in law.
All right, other questions? Are people ready for a vote? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the motion to adopt default articles of agreement, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and so the motion is carried, and we've adopted default articles of agreement. Seeing, I don't think we need a break right yet. We're going to skip that, but get to the final report. And so everybody should have their final report at their desk. And I just wanted to talk quickly a little bit about this process. So at our last meeting, we had a rough draft of a couple of plans and brought those forward. And then based off of all the votes and the provisional votes that have been taken by this board, our council started working together to put together this report. Everybody got a plan as of Saturday and submitted their thoughts to council to get more feedback. And as you can imagine, it's maybe contradictory ideas that came forward. And so I think that's what today is really, to go through this report as a group and maybe have some of these discussions. If you see some of the edits that maybe were not made, we did get contradictory feedback, so that way we can work through this as a group. And so understanding that this full draft came out last night as we were trying to get ready for today and giving time to go forward and through it. So I think the best course of action would be going through this page by page so we can study. Thank you, John. Here. And so the first, if I could maybe invite Tom to come to the table.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you. So as we are going to move forward through this document, and if as people can raise concerns and talk about the report in the way it was written, is the same outline that you saw at our last board meeting. So it's following that same outline. And the outline is on the very first page with the table of contents. And it then starts on page 3 with the introduction. And just want to give board members time, if we want to just take a couple of minutes to get started reading through this last section, and we can ask questions as they come up. I know this might be a little bit boring in the audience, but reading and writing reports, we want to make sure we're doing our due diligence and going through the report. And this is a lot of information. You have a question, Peter?
Tom, I have a question. In the draft introduction, you mentioned Act 60 in terms of tax equity, but there's no mention of it as such in this. Was there a reason for?
I mean, I think I can answer that. We had, I think, different feedback that Act 60 was really part of the legislative story, and we need to stick to the story of the state board. And what, not trying to tell their story about where the law came from, but really stick to what has this process been for the state board, and what have we analyzed when it comes to Act 46 and how we've interpreted it, and that was the mainstay of what our introduction should be. Oliver?
Yeah, and I would echo those comments, and also, I think, really point out, we need to ensure that this document is really tightly focused on our remit under Act 46. So as soon as we start bringing up other pieces of legislation, et cetera, that's sort of ancillary to this, it starts getting muddy.
If I may, I just would like to comment that I thought that it was a good, for me personally, in terms of tax equity versus educational equity, I think that's what 46 is trying to address. So I'm just saying that here and now.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, thank you for letting us know. So I guess if people could just move the mics a little bit forward, because they really do need to be pretty close to you. And if there is a problem, could people just wave and let me know, and that way we can make sure people can get there to the mic. We want everybody able to hear.
Krista,
Yes, Stacy.
can I just clarify? Are you looking for, at this point, for conceptual edits, or are we leaving wordsmithing alone at this point?
I would really like to see conceptual edits,
Okay.
and that way, final word editing, I think we're going to have some sort of motion that can be done, going through with suggestions, but really big concepts, I think, would be extremely helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we get to wordsmithing, I think there's a part of that introduction that I feel like maybe veers us in the wrong way by our word choice, so if later we could go back to that.
Bring that up now, I guess, then that would be.
I just want to question the word idiosyncratic, because I think it can mean distinctive, it can mean peculiar, it can mean typical, it can mean specific, it can mean special, and I think it's taking us down a path of, if it just said the General Assembly through Act 46 sought to right-size school governance, then we're not making commentary on the efficacy or the history, just saying, here's the law, we want to move forward from the law. And that feels more comfortable to me in terms of setting out the precedent of what this is about.
Okay. Is there agreement around that?
To be honest, I'm having a little difficulty hearing because we're getting a
Right.
reverb from the.
Do you want me to say it again? Or skip it?
I caught the essence of it, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so would it help if people are speaking louder with that, or are you getting
It's the echo is the problem for me.
Hearing it twice.
Yeah, it's really distracting.
Oh, so if you're on the sides, you're hearing things twice?
Yeah.
If we move the mics away and just speak to each other, that might work.
Then Nate, but then the audience.
But I don't know if you can hear us.
Is there any way, would audience members be willing to move forward, so that way we could have a better discussion on the board, and that way everybody can participate? I think that would be really helpful, is if you're in the audience, and that way we're not worrying about, we can push them away a little bit so it's picked up for TV, but,
Yeah.
and we can just use our teaching voices.
Or is there somebody here who maybe can adjust the audio? I don't know.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a really bad echo if you're on the stage. I don't know if there's a way to compensate for that somehow.
And turn it
Oh, looks
down,
like-
maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, so how about we try to use our voices and put these so they're picking it up? That's better?
Stop touching my mic.
Yeah.
Better here, but I don't know if the audience can
Okay.
still hear.
Yeah,
So-
Stacy, can you just try to speak in your mic? Because I think whatever they did back there did.
Yeah,
did
I
help.
think that
Try
maybe
again?
helped.
Sorry, say again?
Just do a test on your mic.
Oh. Idiosyncratic.
Just test 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Better for
Is that
me.
better?
Yeah, I think that's better. Yeah.
Okay, and are people in the audience still able to hear? I mean, that's why I want to make sure everybody can hear. If there is a problem, please let us know. And on the stage here, I know sometimes we just need to make sure we speak loudly so everybody can hear us.
So
So Stacy, you want to say that
Yeah,
again? And that way it's where,
In line with the idea that I want to focus on the law and not necessarily the history of what got us here, I just found the phrase out of Vermont's long history of localized and sometimes idiosyncratic school governance. Although I agree with that statement, I just think we should eliminate that clause because I think it makes us rendering commentary on the history versus just the General Assembly through Act 46 has sought to right-size school governance.
I would agree.
is there a general agreement on that to strike that? Okay, so we'll strike the beginning of that sentence and stick with the end.
Madam Chair?
John?
I'm not sure the sequence that you're welcoming these fiddly comments.
Let's do, there is not
yours, but
fiddly.
mine.
If we can stick right now to the introduction. Let's stick, any comments on the introduction, and then we'll move down to the overview. So anything on the 3 paragraphs, page 3, that introduction, that will help us get to a place.
But I think, Chris, Madam Chair, you're looking to sort of anchor the big boulders for now and then fill in the sand later, right?
Yes, yeah, unless there's something that's
Yeah.
sinking up. Bill?
Could we have our attorney tell us the changes that are major as we go through each of these sections? Because if we looked at the earlier version and then we're making this comparison, it'd be easier if we could do that.
I think that's really hard at this point, but Tom, what do you think?
Bill, I took a look at doing a compare and contrast a black line from the Saturday draft to this one, and it was almost indecipherable. There were so many small changes, but I can say that
Just big concepts.
an effort, great care was made to not change any decisions and to not change the substance of the narrative. So edits were made, Stacy's brought this up in some areas, in the tone of statements. A great deal of attention was paid to trying to be as precise as possible. At the same time, trying to assure that the format of the description of the board's decisions from district to district was relatively the same, except where it had to be different. Not all, I think the chair has already indicated, not all edits could be accommodated because they were not all consistent among themselves. And sections 2 and 3 were consolidated, and part of 3 was moved into part 4 or 5, I believe. And ultimately, an effort was made to make it more readable. more accessible and readable. And I guess I have marked the draft in about a dozen places where I can point things out, some of which you can see in the margins as where they were changed. So we can cover those as we get to them.
Any other comments, John? Did you have one on the introduction?
Not on the introduction, it's
Okay.
the next section.
Okay, Oliver?
We think Callahan may have a question.
Is Callahan here by phone?
By phone, yeah.
Callahan?
Yeah, did you have a question, Callahan, or comment? Okay, sorry, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me know she was here. Okay, so we have Callahan by phone. Sometimes it's a long distance first new driver in the snow. Okay, so anything else on the introduction, and are we prepared to move to the overview of the act? Okay, so moving on to the overview of the act. So this one, Tom, do you want to speak to the changes in this section?
This started out as a, you may recall, as an origins piece, and this draft moves away from origins and focuses on what the law is. A little bit of background, and some of which came from some suggestions from Bill, who Bill and I went back and forth on a number of things here with my Act 250 draft, and then Bill gave me back sort of a two-page history of school consolidation going back to 1791.
1792.
Which was fascinating, but ultimately we decided it was too deep a dive for the purpose of this report. And it may be grounds for a dissertation at some other time.
I agree.
But we thought it made sense to, and we try to do this throughout, to keep going back to starting with the goals of Act 46, which is the sort of the lodestar of the board's work, and that's up front. There's some bullets about preferred structure and alternative structures. And I think it's faithful to the, with the exception where there were disagreeing votes within the board on certain decisions, it's faithful to the narrative that the board developed over the last several months in doing its work.
And Oliver, could you speak to the AGS and preferred, because you were pretty instrumental in getting that language, so could you speak to that?
Yeah. So there's been a considerable confusion about sort of some of the definitions and the distinctions between a preferred structure and an AGS structure. And I think because the term AGS has been thrown out in the context of Section 9 proposals that are being submitted, there's sort of a common misunderstanding that an AGS is sort of an alternative put forth by a community that doesn't want to merge, and that's not actually accurate. Under the law, the legislature defined what it calls a preferred governance structure, and that's defined in law, in statute, and that is technically a supervisory district, which is one school district with basically a unified school district and supervisory union. In other words, the school district is not a member of another supervisory union. An alternative governance structure is essentially a supervisory union with two or more member school districts. So it's really important for folks to understand that distinction, because we are actually creating a number of alternative governance structures in this order. And if folks aren't clear on that from the get-go, it creates a lot of confusion. So we made that really abundantly clear up front in the document. That said, the board, there's been sort of this shorthand for, sort of a preferred structure, but not in the legal sense as defined under Act 46. And where it gets a little bit, can be a little confusing is within an alternative governance structure, the law specifies that you have to have the fewest number of member districts practicable. And our approach as we've gone through this process is to focus on looking for opportunities first where we could create a supervisory district, and if that wasn't possible or practicable, then some sort of an alternative governance structure, but within that alternative governance structure to try to find a mix that has resulted in the smallest number of member districts. So we clarified in this section that when we're speaking throughout the document about a preferred structure, it could mean preferred in the legal sense. It could also mean preferred in terms of an alternative governance structure with the smallest number of districts.
If you go to the top of page 5 of this draft, in the carryover paragraph, the last sentence, I think it hits that nail on the head. It says, throughout this final report in order, the term, quote, preferred structure, end quote, may sometimes be used more colloquially to refer to a unified union school district that meets all elements of the formal definition except that it is a member of an SU rather than its own supervisory district.
John?
I'm looking at the top of page 4, where in the sentence that begins, Vermont's General Assembly dictated a two-part process, a voluntary and an involuntary phase. I don't know where the statute uses the term involuntary.
I don't think that's a quote from the statute. I think it's been, the way I understood the board was itself referring to the second part of the process.
Yeah, I think if the board has been calling what we've been doing for the last 4 months, dealing with involuntary mergers, I think that's a misstatement. And I think it's a rather prejudicial term. The legislature never used the word involuntary. It did establish alternate governance structures. And if we want to make distinctions, we can make distinctions between voluntary mergers and a second phase of alternate proposals or something like that. But involuntary, these towns did not regard that what they were doing was involuntary. They were, in fact, directed by the General Assembly in Section 9 that they can and should make proposals for alternate governance structures. And it was not an involuntary process at all. What might be involuntary is the ruling of this board.
So what would you suggest for language for that, or does anybody else have a suggestion for the language? So, any suggestions?
If you feel it's important to call this a two-part process, and actually it was more than 2 parts, there were multiple stages of the so-called voluntary mergers. If you feel it's imperative to have this sentence, then I would at least substitute alternative as an option, or Section 9 or something like that. But to call all of this involuntary is inaccurate.
Would you prefer if it was Vermont General Assembly dictated a process to consolidate school districts?
Sure.
Just get rid of that whole part? Does that make sense?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And then you also have the paragraph following the numbered list. You'd have the same strike because you have the reference to voluntary and voluntary as well.
Right.
John,
Yeah.
That would have to be amended as well.
Yes, that's what, just to make it, strike it, just so it says General Assembly defined
Dictated a
merger
process.
process,
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
defined a merger process that would ensure.
There's a third reference
The
to.
word involuntary appears 5 times in the document.
Yeah.
Twice in the sense that John has identified, and 3 times in the terms of involuntary merger. Does the board want to strike it when it appears in the involuntary versus voluntary merger process as well?
Could you give an example of that? Where's that?
Sure. On on page 5. Page 5 under B, the board's review and decision-making process, at the last line of the first paragraph. With respect to involuntary mergers within alternative structures. And it appears, it's used in that context 2 other places as well, all in the same section of the document.
I think removing the word involuntary doesn't alter.
Yeah, mergers.
Yeah, I think we're fine.
So if we get rid of that.
So strike it wherever it
Are you
appears.
suggesting removing or not removing?
Removing, yeah,
Removing,
yeah.
yep,
yeah,
so
I think-
striking that.
Yeah, I think the essence of what we're trying to say doesn't change, so we
Right.
should be okay.
Okay.
Got it.
And where else do we see that then? Or is just all, anything with, when it says involuntary, we're just going to strike that?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, voluntary or involuntary, we're just.
Just leave
Yeah,
it as
yeah.
a merger?
I mean, the only reason we did that was to try to distinguish between what was happening in the, before it came, the merger process before it came to the board. So just trying to find some way to define, there's a distinction, and I disagree with John about referring to alternative governance structures, because that's not a clean definition, because we're also creating preferred governance structures. So that doesn't work. But I think we just need to be.
Starting with proposals that are alternative governance structures. We may impose preferred structures, but what has been presented to us
Right.
is under the rubric of alternative governance structures.
Right, but oftentimes what we're implementing is an alternative governance
I got
structure,
that.
but
That's
it's
what the
not the
board's-
one that was proposed.
Actually,
Mark?
I think under Section 9 of Act 46, it refers to these, I think what we're referring to as involuntary structures as structures that are different from preferred structures. And so maybe we can refer to them as non-preferred structures.
Not to be even more confusing.
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Or,
sure,
or we
why
just
not?
leave it as mergers?
I would just leave it as mergers, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Page 6.
Yeah, Joe?
I'm not trying to nitpick, but there's just one word that jumps out at me, abandoned.
And just tell us where, so.
Bottom, second to the last paragraph, in the end, the board abandoned the effort. I just say the board opted not to adopt guiding principles.
Yep.
It just, abandoned seems
Yeah.
like, I watch this show on abandoned structures all over the world, and they're usually pretty ugly.
Okay.
It just seems like an ugly word.
Okay, and so what would you
Versus
like there instead?
Opted to not, instead of abandoned. Just
Okay.
opted to not adopt the guiding principles in favor of focusing on the text of
Okay.
of Act 46. Yeah.
Oh, Bill.
This has to do with page 4 and the following pages as well. It's like we set up these 2 categories in terms of, where am I? The preferred plans, preferred structure, and the alternative structure. And yet, the law looks like it says either one of them is a proper procedure. But when we start reading through the decisions, we see that there is a particular bias towards preferred structures. And I don't think that's really justified in what the law says. And it almost sets up a priority order that I don't think the law provides for.
And I think we can get to that when we move closer to the report, but just in this background section,
Well, we're setting up the following sections, is why I bring it up now.
yeah. So, and I think point taken, and as we go through the rest,
We may have
need
to come
go
back.
Yep. But I think this is coming from the law
This is
itself.
coming from the
The
law.
law itself. So I don't think we would
I know
change these
that.
bullets. Others. So on this, we have, in this section, so starting on page 3, the Act 46 background and legal framework. We have the board's review and decision-making process, and that goes on to the top of page 7. Anything else in there? I guess then I have a question just with our previous conversation. On page 6, and the second full paragraph down, 3 lines up from the bottom, it says, "The board wrestled with whether and how to give weight to the final phase of Act 46 to local no votes cast during the voluntary phase." Are we comfortable with that as a voluntary phase? And how to properly consider Act 49's guidance that a supervisory union has the smallest number of member school districts practicable after consideration of greatly differing levels of indebtedness. So just that voluntary phase, what would people, I'm just getting a sense that that's might stick out, and what would people want instead?
I'm trying to recall if the word voluntary appears in the statute. I know during the legislative process, it was, shorthand was these were voluntary mergers, so.
And I think that's carried over to a lot of the
Yeah.
discussion we've had here, but as we're putting things in writing, yeah.
Well, it might be useful to be a little less specific, because I think we wrestled with opposition to mergers expressed in a number of settings and over a number of different phases of the act.
Okay.
And so our concern always has been, so what do we make of this opposition to merger that it undergirds or supports the presence of a proposal not to merge? And so we could, I think, just, I'm pleased that we acknowledged that we struggled with this. I might say we resolved it in rather different ways, but we can clean this up by simply local no votes cast at various stages of the process,
I think that's a really good
rather than
point, yeah.
restricting it to the voluntary phase, because it happened in all phases.
Yeah.
Well, and then maybe to your point taken, maybe not just no votes, but opposition.
Opposition is a better
Yeah.
way, because
Yeah.
there was, many times there was not a vote, but there was opposition within a committee or a board, or whatever.
Or the
Yeah.
petition we just got, or
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, so now we're getting at it.
Okay. And John, to that point, I do think everybody really struggled with that, and everybody on this board really thought about it was very uncomfortable. And so I hope that captures enough of the uncomfortableness that everybody on this board felt and going through, and that's why I think wrestling is, because everybody did wrestle with it in their own way, and people moved back and forth throughout and hearing testimony. So I hope that's properly reflected in here.
Thank you.
Other areas that people want to bring attention to? So any more discussion or question to bring up under the board's review and decision-making process?
A question
Yeah.
for uniformity. Occasionally, there are references in the draft to acting secretary. Most of them are to secretary. Does the board have a clear view on which way or the other, or is having some of each okay?
And I guess when it's referring to the secretary's plan, would people prefer it being acting secretary or just secretary? That's kind of the question, one or the other.
Well,
What's
the
the general
acting
sense?
secretary had a seal on their wall that says they were the secretary for that time, so I think it's appropriate.
Okay, so are we in agreement that we would rather it say secretary, not acting secretary? Okay, so let's see that. Anything else that, for uniformity for that first section that is needed? And are people comfortable moving on? I feel like I'm seeing people move ahead. Okay. All right, so when we get to Roman numeral 3, which, by the way, they actually don't teach in schools anymore. So when you're trying to do legal documents with students, they're always like, what are those numbers over there? So just quick, yeah, they don't teach those anymore. So I don't know. It just, but it is interesting when you're looking at the legal document, and I do that with students, and they're like, what's that amendment? I was like, oh, 15. Okay, so the board's decision on the secretary's proposed state plan. So Roman numeral 3. So decisions approving the secretary's proposal that affirm the current governance structure. And in this section, if we want to take some time just with the, I guess with the reading first, and maybe I'll just read this through and then we can get to individual cases. But it talks about the board's decision in this section are made to approve the secretary's proposal either in its original form or in its amended form that adheres to the provisions of subsection A pursuant to Act 46, Section 10B. Upon review of the proposal of Secretary June 1st, 2018 proposed statewide plan, the school board Section 9 proposal, testimony from the school board at state meetings, and other input and supplemental information from the involved communities and their school district leadership, the state board approves of the secretary's proposals to affirm the current governance structures of 35 school districts. They're subject to the board's consideration in the final report of decisions and orders. So any comments or questions on that?
When will we get firm numbers or numbers that will go into the report?
We think as of now, 35 is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. In the prior draft, it was 37. I just wanted to keep that placeholder in case the board did something different today. We need to go back.
Just as a way of going back. Okay, so these are all in cases that the board agreed with the secretary.
And for the schools, it means status quo, effectively.
For many of them, yes.
Many?
Well, yeah, yes. So, yes, as we're looking through.
I guess it's the exception to the many that I'd be curious about.
I note that the footnote on the bottom of page 7, footnote 4, also appears for, I guess, greater emphasis as footnote 5 on the bottom of page 8, so we'll clean that up. That's the Arlington-Sandgate district boundary.
Okay.
So are people comfortable with page 7? Okay, page 8, it starts on these proposals in the Secretary's plan concern districts for which mergers under the statewide plan is or might be possible, but for which is not practicable. The board agrees with the Secretary's analysis and recommendations for these 8 districts, finding that there are no viable merger options for any of them in light of the statutory prohibition of making changes to a district's operating and/or tuitioning structure in the board's final report of decisions order. And then additionally, Stanford presents a unique set of circumstance given its geographic position and historical ties to a neighbor community in Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Stanford presents compelling evidence to the board which demonstrates a commitment to working towards the development of more sustainable governance structure through the formation of an interstate school district with neighboring. So then it goes through more information. And everybody comfortable? Okay, so on page 8, when it starts then talking about Arlington, Canaan, Coventry, Sharon, this group of proposals compromises districts for which merger with proposed plan is not possible and not practical, or neither possible nor practical. Each of these districts has an operating structure unlike the ones adjacent to them. The board agrees with the Secretary's analysis and recommendation that these 10 districts, finding there are no viable merger options in the light of statutory prohibition of making changes to district operations and/or tuitioning structures, to the board's final report or decisions of order. Yeah.
So I just realized there's a misplaced footnote. The Arlington, footnote number 4
On the page
on
beforehand?
page 7 is tied, it looks like it's tied to Pittsfield, to the non-operating districts, so I think that just, it needs to be moved under Arlington.
So footnote. Okay, then we have the Bellows Falls, Rockingham, Hazen, Sanford, and Sanford District 7 through 12, the Mount Anthony Union School District, and North Bennington Incorporated, and then North Country Union High School. And this is the group proposals in the proposed plan comprise 12 districts for which merger under the proposed plan is not possible. Each of these set of districts included a Union High School district and one or more elementary district that did not share a common operating tuitioning structure with the other elementary school districts. So this is the secretary agreeing with the Secretary's decision. Any commentary on that piece? Yes, yeah, John.
I'm still having, by the way, you can really hear well out there.
Oh, good.
You sound terrific, all of you.
Thank you, John.
But I'm not sure just where we are. Are you in those 2 indented paragraphs on page 9?
Page 9, yeah,
Yeah.
so starting on that right above
So
there.
the second bulleted paragraph that begins similarly,
Yeah,
it might be more clear since actually what's happening in the second paragraph is the precise obverse of what happened in the first. It might be better to say conversely rather than similarly, because it's, they're the reverse of one another. We disagreed, but we disagreed in reverse.
okay.
Got it.
So
Okay,
conversely might be better than similarly, that's all.
Okay. Besides that, any other content on those paragraphs?
Yes, I would like to go back over some old territory a little bit because it becomes important. In terms of this not practicable and or neither possible, we spent some long time on that discussing it, but I left feeling a little bit confused on this. And when I look at the law, the only time that's mentioned is in section 10A2, in which it is a half a sentence. And it just strikes me that all of a sudden we're hanging this entire 46 pages of law on a half a sentence, which is a conditional sentence. Anyway.
Can you give us the page, Bill?
I'm on page 19 of Act 46, at the bottom.
So what Bill, and especially for those in the audience, if you're looking at section 10, and it is going down to 2.
Third line from the bottom.
Yep, so I'll just read, on or before June 1st, 2018, shall develop, publish on the agency's website, and present to the State Board of Education a proposed plan that, to the extent necessary to promote the purpose stated at the beginning of this subsection, would move districts into a more sustainable preferred model of governance set forth in Section 5 of this Act. If it is not possible or practical to develop a proposal that aligns with some districts, where necessary, in an education district in a manner that adheres to the protections of Section 4 of this Act, or otherwise meeting all aspects of Section 5, then the proposal may also include alternative governance structures as necessary, such as a supervisory union with member districts or a unified union school district with a similar average daily membership, provided, however, that any proposed alternative governance structure shall be designed to, and then it lays that out. So yes, I mean, I do think a lot of this is saying if the plan, if it's not possible or practical, then there has to be something else developed. And that's why a lot of the Secretary did propose alternative governance structures. because sometimes it wasn't practical or possible.
That's exactly how it's used, but I'm still playing with this where it begins in subsection A, would move districts into the more. And when it talks about the subsection A, it goes back to the goals, the 5 goals. And this gets me to my question of what trumps what.
It doesn't only refer to the 5 goals. It also requires the other requirements of an alternative governance structure, and there's a whole section in there.
Section 5.
That speaks to the smallest number of districts within that alternative governance structure.
And Section 5 was also amended by Act 49.
Yeah, it also includes alternative governance structures as part of that.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When you get to alternative governance structures, it says, but an alternative governance structure has to have the smallest number of districts within it. And that's
Yeah.
the key thing that a lot of people are missing.
Comments?
No. I think we've, Bill and I exchanged some advice and comment about this over the last 2 or 3 days, and
Can you speak up, Tom?
I'm sorry, Bill and I exchanged some advice and commentary over the last 3 or 4 days on this, and I think Oliver has stated where I think the state of the law is. Sometimes when there's only one place in a statute where a phrase is stated, does not diminish its import or power if it's the right words in the right place. I think in the overall context of Act 46, that's the result I get to.
John?
Madam Chair, I concur with the concern that Bill has raised. I think it's a rather general concern about how we have gone about our business together, and not so specific to editing or correcting details in this document. But I hope once we have the document the way we like it, there'll be an opportunity, the chair has assured me that there'll be an opportunity to discuss in a broader scope how well we have followed the dictates of the law in coming to the rulings that we have. And I hope you could bring that concern up at that time, because I share it, and we can perhaps elaborate and have a dialogue about that.
Okay. All right, so moving on with the report, the way it's written then, in talking about some of those bigger questions. And if we are on page 9. And this is decisions approving the secretary's proposals that require merger.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
May I
John.
just say, I really appreciate the general structure of this, where you've grouped the decisions into like kinds, as did the Secretary in the original plan. I think it's very helpful for readers to understand the similarities in these situations, and then to look more granularly at how the board resolved them, either as a group or differentiated in some cases, with the exceptions you've noted. So I just think this structure is very helpful, much more useful than simply a linear listing of all of the cases that we grappled with.
So we're moving on to, on page 10, sorry, excuse me. On page 10, it starts a section looking at Brattleboro Union High School, Missisquoi Valley Union High School, Oxbow Union District number 32, and each Union District member's elementary school districts. So if we can maybe start in that section, and if we have comments, so that would be page 10 to page 12.
Did each of these provide a Section 9 proposal? It appears so, but I'm not sure.
So I think it addresses that on page 10. Or Oliver?
Yeah, we're on the Brattleboro region now, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, and I think
Yeah,
that
and
second bullet.
Yeah, I think what was really confusing here is that there were boards that didn't actually, at least one board submitted a Section 9 proposal. I think it was actually two, because I think Vernon signed on to it as well. So it was Dummerston and Vernon. But then the other submissions, I know Guilford had a submission, but it was not a Section 9 proposal. What they said actually contradicted the other submission and said, please merge us.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a Section 9 proposal. So I think we just need to be careful in the use of the term Section 9 proposals, because with the exception of Dummerston and I believe Vernon, they were not Section 9 proposals. They were simply comments.
And so how do we want to address that? So if we're looking at that second bullet, the board of each of these districts submitted separate and seemingly conflicting Section 9 proposals?
I would just say feedback or propose.
Section 9 proposals.
Or just say proposals.
Proposals.
Yeah, just eliminate Section 9.
Section
Yeah.
9. Okay.
And then we do need, and Donna, I don't know if maybe she could confirm.
She's down.
Poor Donna. Do you have a question that you want to ask
Yeah,
her?
just, I think just really quickly confirm, where it says only one of the 4-member districts, Dummerston, submitted a proposal for an AGS. I believe Vernon also signed on to that same.
one of the 4 that are members of
Oh, got it, yes. Thank you. Okay, so that is accurate then, yes, that bullet, yep.
Okay.
Kristen. Kristen.
Stacy?
I agree with Oliver. I thought it was important that throughout the document, we either mention whether or not people submitted Section 9 proposals, school boards, or not. In some places in the earlier drafts, it had or had not been mentioned. So in the effort to remain consistent, could we say the boards of each of these districts submitted separate proposals, parentheses, including Section 9 proposals, just so that we're clear that maybe that's muddying waters too much, but I wanted to be clear throughout the document that some communities who opposed the secretary's plans for merger did not submit Section 9 proposals, and I think that's telling in how we assessed
Yep.
the strength of their argument.
I mean, Putney did not submit a Section 9 proposal.
No.
They expressed some reservations, but that's all.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just not hearing consensus of how we want to treat that.
I think we should specify whatever it was that they put in. And it ran from a potpourri, from a verbal presentation to 100-page proposals with some just being letters. There's a whole mixture in there.
But I think the point taken is that there is a variety, and
Yeah.
some of them are not proposals.
Yeah.
Some of them are a letter with an intent to vote, and that's
Yeah.
what they submitted under Section 9.
There-
There wasn't the self-evaluation, there wasn't the review, it was just a letter.
There were actually relatively few valid Section 9 proposals submitted. There was a lot of comments and proposals and things, but a lot of them actually weren't technically Section 9 proposals.
Did we give them instructions as to what should be in a Section 9 proposal?
We absolutely did.
Yeah,
Rule
the
Rule 3400. It was very,
I read that, but I didn't see it as being that clear, to tell you the truth. But my idea is to list whatever it was that they put there and just go on with it.
yeah.
So in this, could we just say letters and Section 9 proposals, or is that, what am I hearing?
I would say feedback and section, feedback or,
Within the section in which the school is discussed, we could put,
I'm sorry, I didn't.
okay, this will probably get further on, and I'm jumping
Well, no,
ahead.
let's not jump right now. So let's
Okay.
figure this out on page 10.
Yeah.
Because it says Section 9 proposals, and some of what was submitted was not Section 9 proposals, but more of letters. What do we want this wording to be?
Would it be
Yeah.
sufficient to simply say the boards of some of these districts submitted proposals?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But I think then
what
Stacy
you're
was saying
getting
she
to?
would like to see something about, like, was it a Section 9 or not? So that's why I'm trying to mitigate.
Or maybe proposals, but not necessarily valid Section 9 proposals.
What about just responses? Something that doesn't.
I don't know
confuse.
why we need to get into the weeds in a summary report. like
It's
this.
important because we keep hearing, there's this rhetoric out there about all these Section 9 proposals, and oftentimes it's coming from communities that didn't actually submit one. And I think that's important.
Do we want to be specific that we received a Section 9 proposal from Dummerston and then feedback from other communities? Would that suffice?
There wasn't so much feedback as informal statements of position. For example, Guilford certainly gave a clear idea of their concerns. It wasn't feedback which implies a response.
True.
Right.
true.
So we received both formal and informal proposals from some of these districts, I guess.
Or-
Would that
satisfy you?
Would that work? Sure. So formal, and Dan, did you want, oh, Stacy.
Sorry, I'm not trying to nitpick too much, but I'm agreeing with Oliver that whether or not they complied with the law, I feel like is an essential part of the analysis. So it could be informal and Section 9 proposals that complied with requirements as stated in 3400, or something, I think, just to differentiate.
And I think that's what was hard about this area, was that we had some formal and some informal, and trying to reconcile, what is that community, where are they?
And not only that, but, it's, what's really interesting in a few of these Section 9 proposals, and this is a great example of one, is you've got a district proposing a Section 9 alternative governance structure, and if with all of its other peers, if you will, but then you have the other peers who are providing different and sometimes contradictory feedback. So it's the spirit of this was you get a bunch of people together and you sort of agree on what you want to do as a unit, and you present a unified front, and that didn't happen here.
Sure.
So could we go back to maybe the idea of the formal, informal proposals, and then bullet below, one of the 4-member districts where it mentions Dummerston submitted a proposal? I mean, would that satisfy? So that way it is mentioned that they did submit that, but then there were other informal and formal.
I think there's some ambiguity when you use proposals twice and then you're trying to differentiate between them.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think comments is a good
Responses or something.
Well,
more
I think to
generic.
John's point, response implies that it's a response, and it was more inputs.
So we closer or further away, or,
Feedback?
Well, he had the same concern with
Yeah, it's
feedback, which I think
feedback.
was, yeah, it's, I would go with inputs or comments.
inputs,
Both. Can we not say both?
comments, so
Yeah.
input and comment both, okay, so comments.
Comments.
Comments, and then below, and I think Stacy, if this, it mentions that the AGS, it was submitted by Dummerston. Okay. Moving on, but those are good conversations to have, because that's what we need to make sure we're getting through. Yeah. So if people are comfortable, then moving on to Missisquoi Valley.
Not to add any additional labor to this process. In this cluster, we say in the next paragraph, we refer to the discussions at the board's October 17th meeting when the provisional vote was taken. Depending upon where we are at some point later this morning in terms of getting a final document together, it might be prudent wherever there's been substantive discussion about these here today is to add and the board's November 28th, 2018 meeting.
I think that would make sense, especially for that one, November 28th.
Yeah,
Oh.
Tom, you got to speak up, I think.
Sorry.
I know
My
you're-
comment was the current working draft makes reference for the rationale and reasons for this decision to the discussions of the board at its October 17 meeting. I think we should also add the November 28th meeting to that here and wherever else there's been substantive board discussion about the pros and cons.
No, agreed. So we should add that discussions of November 28th.
Madam Chair,
Yes, John?
if we're still on page 11, Mrs. Skoye,
Yep.
the second paragraph, last line, last sentence, the board ultimately found that the Secretary's proposal made a strong case in favor of a merger of these districts minus Sheldon. I'd be more comfortable with this if we said that the board concurred with the Secretary's proposal in favor of a merger, rather than characterizing it as a strong case.
I would support that.
Yep.
Yeah, and good catch, because that's what sometimes the adjectives matter, so.
Yeah, all words matter, and
Yeah.
in this case, I think, from memory, the reason given by the Secretary was her deference to the legislature's preference for unified structures, and that's not exactly a strong case. We concurred with it, but it doesn't make it a strong case.
Others in that section.
Well, it raises the question as to what the strong case was.
We might discuss that.
So, what, Bill, could you speak into the mic? No? Okay. All right. So, anything else in that section?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a minor
John.
change, maybe absent Sheldon instead of minus Sheldon.
Or sans.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
That's a nicer word.
Absent. Is there any mention in here that, that this would create an SD, and is that needed? Because that was the point of the Secretary's plan, is that this was not only creating a preferred, but it was preferred in the fact that it was their own SD. Once Sheldon was moved to another supervisory union, that they were one unit. So would we want to add that in? I don't think so. John?
Would that not also have been true in the case of Brattleboro? Is that not a UUSD that has been created? Or is it
No,
Vernon
Vernon.
issue?
Vernon, right, so it's not, they have two districts, but this would be one district. It'd be a supervisory district.
The distinction is there's a good home for Sheldon, where Vernon was really difficult to find a.
Understood.
Right, so if we could add that in the creation of an SD.
So a merger of these districts into an SD, absent Sheldon. Got it.
John?
Does that mean then that Brattleboro is an SAU with member districts?
It's an alternative governance structure.
Somewhere in Act 46, I think it's Section 8, there's a requirement that the board shall find that any proposal for a supervisory union being proposed or continuing, the board shall find XYZ. I don't remember the exact language, but they're fairly high standards. I think Section 8 obliges us to, it would appear that it obliges us affirmatively to find that any supervisory union going forward must meet certain requirements. Now, I'm not suggesting that this SU does not meet those requirements. I'm only suggesting that procedurally, it may be that we're obliged, if not in this plan, then in some setting, to make this finding. And it should be easy enough in most of these cases, but the one that comes to mind, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, is the North Country,
Oh,
And I think this board would have a hard time concurring in the finding that Section 8 requires it to make, since I've kind of heard this board sort of throwing up its hands about the future of that supervisory union. So I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, encouraged the board to hold off on some of those broader SU reconfiguration conversations, because they need more study and analysis, and a recommendation, I think, from the secretary. But there are 5 low-hanging fruit, if you will. You just identified one in Missisquoi that, with absence of Sheldon, you have an SD there. There are 4 others, Barry, Washington Central, Lamoille South, and Orwell, Slate Valley, that are easy to configure with your mergers. But I would argue the remaining parts of the state, including Brattleboro, Vernon, that area requires more study. And I think when we look back at the statutory language that empowers the board to reconfigure supervisory union composition and boundaries, that there needs to be analysis on the impact on the other side of the arrangement. Having been a superintendent who's gone through that, you have to look at both sides of it, not just the current SU. So it does require more study that's really, I think, beyond the scope of this exercise in Act 46, except for those 5, which are, I think, relatively easily achieved through your merger activity.
And also, I was just getting to where in Section 8 were you?
Well, I think the secretary was just, I believe you were referring to 8B, which speaks to supervisory unions. I'm referring to 8A, which speaks to school districts. Am I making sense?
But this is also for Section 6 and 7 of the law.
I'm sorry?
Section 8 is state board's role under Section 6 and 7 of the Act. So at the very top, and that's when it goes shall and then goes down. So this is school districts when evaluating proposal to create union districts pursuant to 16 VSA Chapter 11, including a proposal submitted pursuant to provisions 6 or 7 of this Act.
Understood.
And so 6 and 7 is when areas came to us and had to get approval before they could vote.
So that was a
And so were those findings made at that time? Was that what you would figure?
That's what I'm trying to get to the question. What's the?
Well, I concur that, so perhaps what you're saying is that process has already been done and is not part of the state plan.
Right. Yeah.
Fine, I'm square with that.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
that was essentially what we're not calling now the voluntary phase of this
Right.
process. And I'm glad
Section 6 and 7.
Yeah.
The
I'm glad
carrot phase.
Yeah.
And one of the things, that this actually dealt with the geographic isolation, and I want to bring
Exactly.
this up because this is another point of considerable misinformation out in the public. There are folks reading this section, and they think that it applies to what we're dealing with now, and it actually doesn't. This was designed to ensure that as districts are going through the voluntary process, they weren't isolating their neighbors.
Yeah.
Right.
So at this point, when people look kindly on a small break, we're getting to that point where it is on our agenda to just take a break. And get a chance, so it's 10:30. We were going to break at 10:15. So if we could come back at 10:40, take a 10-minute break. Is that okay, people? All right, so 10 minutes, and we'll be back. So we'll come back from break, and I do know that Tom is working, our council is working on getting copies for people in the audience that would like one. So this was a confidential document up until this morning, but now we're talking about it, and there will be copies made available. I think they're working on that right now. And again, thank you to our hosts for helping us get those copies made. So if we could pick up where we left off, we were on page 11. Yes, Bill.
Madam Chair, I'd like to put a place marker in for later discussion on Missisquoi, where it says, absent compelling evidence to the contrary in the particular instance, the Secretary defers to the legislator's determination, etc. That, I think, is a debatable presumption, and I'm not sure we should be doing that, but we can discuss it at a later time.
Can you just clarify where on page 11? I just was having a hard time following you. Or are you talking about the plan itself, the
Yeah,
secretary's plan?
page 42.
Okay, so, but on page 11, is there anything written in there that you want to flag?
Well, it's probably the same language.
Yeah, I think he's going to the secretary's report, but I think we need to
Yeah,
stick
we need
to,
to stick with the document.
stick with this document for right now.
Okay,
Yeah,
page 11,
page 11.
last paragraph before Oxbow. And I want to mark that it continues, it's used probably 20 or 30 times in the document itself. And I think we should spend some time talking about it.
Yeah, I'm confused where, I'm not seeing
Where are you at, Bill?
what you're talking.
According, the last paragraph in Missisquoi, which is in the middle of page 11, which begins with, is the fourth paragraph down. Accordingly, the board confirms the provisional decision for these districts made at its October meeting and approves the secretary's proposals. This actually gets back to raising some questions about whether we want to accept this form of making just this provisional rebuttable assumption.
Well, I think that that language was also taken from the motion that was passed that day. So I don't, yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, I think maybe something we can talk about when we talk about sort of the adoption of the overall plan, if that makes sense. But I think for right now, we're going through the report.
Right now, let's continue with the report.
Okay. So other things, so after that, we have Oxbow. So reading through here, other comments, questions, concerns, wordsmithing. Yeah. I think what really, I think this board was shocked with and is capsulated here is that the supervisory union has not yet in compliance with legislative mandates from 2010. So I was glad that that was captured in this report. All right, moving on then to UHSD number 32, U32. Questions, comments in this section? Okay, seeing none, moving on to the Barnard School, Cambridge, Huntington, Orwell, Wyndham, and, in that section. So this group of proposals and secretary's proposed plan comprises 5 town elementary school districts, all of which are member school districts for secondary grades and modified union school districts. The secretary's proposal plan recommended that each elementary district be required to merge as a full pre-kindergarten through 12 member of its respective MUUSD. In the voters of the MUUSD approve full membership of the elementary school district, the board agrees and makes the following final decisions. So in these cases, and going back to Stacy's comments earlier, do you want to talk about section, mention who submitted proposals and who didn't, and make sure that's consistent? I think that was some of your comments earlier. And do you see things that you want to change your language? Yeah.
So I just conferred a little bit with legal counsel during our break on this one, and looking at the language in the statute and the rules, the language is a little squishy, I guess if we can use that word. So, one could make a credible argument that even though it didn't conform to what was outlined in 3400, that there was enough flexibility in there that something submitted could be considered a Section 9 proposal. So I'm going to sort of retract a little bit from my earlier position that we should, try to make that distinction just because there the law and the rules are not as clear as they probably could have been.
I'll accept that.
Okay.
Chris, they're way at the end, I think, there's on 15.
On page 15?
Yeah, the second paragraph, it has a period and then a space, and then it says, to quote the secretary's proposed plan.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Should just, I don't know if that's
A
supposed to be
hanging
up
period.
in the next one, or maybe a new paragraph, I'm not sure, but,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem.
John?
Just a question about our process, Madam Chair. We're due to conclude work on this subject and complete our vote, if I understand correctly, by 12:15 PM. Is that correct?
Potentially, yep. I just want people to feel comfortable that they've gone through this and any commentary that they want to give. So if we want to, I mean, we could just go through and where people are having problems, or do we want to go through faster? I'm up for that.
Well, that's, I guess what I'm
Yeah.
just inquiring about, it's my hope anyway that there could be 20 to 30 minutes of general discussion, not page by page, but sort of retrospective about where we've been, how we did it and all that, and just why I'm going to support this proposal or why I'm not. And that could take 30 minutes, maybe.
So could we
So
plan
I'm just
on,
concerned about wrapping up this work
yeah,
by 11:30 or at the latest quarter of 12, so that we could have a general discussion before we get to the final vote.
take a vote, yes.
Could I suggest maybe we just pause on the section-by-section review and have that discussion? It almost makes sense to have that discussion first.
If you wish, or perhaps we could have it under, I mean, this is the first time that any of us have seen the document in this form. I mean, I didn't see it at 4 o'clock this morning when it came
Yeah.
around.
So it's a Saturday, it was a Saturday form, then updated. So a lot of it is very similar, especially in this part.
Right,
It's, there's
understood,
no-
but
yeah.
it's not, as Tom said at the beginning, it's not, you can't map what you've seen before and what you haven't. You have to study the whole thing. Anyway, I don't have any problems with the document as it is. I'm just wondering if, process-wise, we might have an understanding apropos of I think what Oliver has suggested at our last meeting, that some of these editorial details can be brought up either at Friday's meeting or in the interim by whatever rules you set forth. I'm just sort of trying to say, this isn't your last chance to comment on this, I think?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Well, that's why I am increasingly of the belief that we should suspend the section-by-section review and have that discussion now, because I don't want that discussion to be rushed.
I agree.
Friday's a placeholder.
Yeah,
We're not
Friday's a
planning to actually
placeholder.
have that unless, I think Oliver's idea was that unless it was necessary, unless we had some big change between today and Friday.
I
then
think
we
that
had to-
was the idea at the last meeting, was that you all asked to have that warned, so that way if there was any big substantive changes through this report, that I could come to you and say, we need to have these big changes, we need to have this meeting to make sure we confer as a group. But I think the hope of this is to have a report that just needs editing. So if it's ideas, big ideas, that would require an additional meeting on Friday. But to have it in a place. And Tom, could you maybe just, as a suggestion of, because I appreciate, I want to have that discussion, but I feel like we're not going to be able to then come back. So if there's any big concepts that people need to address with a full group, I think this is the time to do it. And Stacy?
Well, just recognizing the many ways in which we've wrestled and discussed and argued different points of view and have come around to understand one another's points of view. I think we could keep having this conversation for days. So I respect and understand, I'd like to hear from John, but I also think it'd be important for someone to time keep or moderate, let each person talk for 3 or 4 minutes, but something that would keep it organized enough that we can continue to move forward. Because I think we all I appreciate the intellectual kind of debate around these conversations, and I think we could keep having them for a while. So does that sound like a framework people are willing to work with?
I would concur with that. And again, I'd like to have the intellectual discussion before we go too much further in the weeds, because I think it'll actually make the section-by-section review more efficient if we kind of get past, I see it as making sure we're anchored around the big boulders, and then we can fill the sand in later.
All right, so I have a procedural question to ask. Do we need a motion or to adopt, or is it just looking at, we have approval of final plan, or just discussion?
You could have a motion. You also, I get Stacy's point that, we could go on indefinitely, so you also could suspend the rules to limit the amount of time dedicated to that, or each person could speak on it. I think each one of us could speak for 20 minutes on why we think the plan's a good plan, or we don't agree with the plan. So you could also do that, too.
I think we can probably do it pretty informally without, a motion. I think we just have the discussion, and per Stacy's suggestion, let's agree to sort of carve out, let's call it 20 minutes to have this final sort of big picture discussion, and
If we
with
need
the
more,
understanding that we're going to, close it down and then move on to kind of finalizing the draft, assuming that a majority of the board is on board.
So why don't we right now, we have 11 o'clock. And why don't we say we have a high-level discussion 11 to 11:30, and we'll hold ourselves to that. I'm not going to time keep for board members. I'm just going to ask you to share the airtime. So I think we're all pretty good about that. And so knowing that we're going to have a high-level discussion, and people are going to want to respond and just self-moderate. And I do want to acknowledge that this has been a very long process. For me individually, when I joined the board 6 years ago, the first committee I was put on was governance. So that was the first thing with Bill and Mark, it was with Mark and Stacy, and we were looking at governance issues. So it's been a long time coming. So I want to make sure everybody can kind of have a voice in this conversation. But I know that, John, you've been very vocal about wanting to make sure you have your say. So I wonder if you want to start the conversation.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. In the interest of abbreviating my comments, I'll distribute them in full. There'll be a final examination upon completion.
Will there be a multiple choice test or open-ended?
It will not be multiple choice. It'll be an essay examination.
I see there's a staple in the document that indicates more than one page.
I'm going to.
Do you have any more?
I do.
2 more, or 1 more? One more.
One more.
Please.
There's 2. I'm going to dispense with the first part of this sort of how much I love you all, which is true, and how much I value the privilege of working with you. I think we've really done some good stuff together, even, and maybe especially, when we don't agree. I'll move to the sort of heart of my concerns, if you'll bear with me. So I'm down into the part, I think, that's called mergers versus the will of the people. So in the final state plan and orders, which is now before us, the board orders mergers that will affect dozens of local school boards and their communities. And of the districts that could have merged, but instead elected under Section 9 to develop a local plan for school governance to meet the goals of the Act, the board has dismissed virtually all such proposals. Now, instead, the board intends to order these districts to merge with other districts. The board's order will dissolve dozens of local school boards and replace them with multi-town regional districts. By my count, and I could be wrong about this, the state plan will impose mergers on more than 30 Vermont communities which have explicitly opposed mergers. 30 towns. That's more than 1 in 10 Vermont communities. that means that thousands of Vermont voters are being told by this board, not in so many words, but that their vote doesn't matter. Well, the question to me is, well, should votes matter when it comes to Act 46 and merging school districts? The toll of the bell. I arranged that. One would certainly think that it should matter. The Act itself prohibits adoption of any voluntary mergers unless the plan is affirmatively approved by the majority of voters in each community. So it's hard to understand how it is that when a district chooses not to merge, the state board imposes a merger and doesn't matter in that case what the voters think. It's just hard to square those two parts of the law. And I grant you there's nothing in Section 9 or after Sections 6 and 7 that requires votes. But it's a challenge for ordinary people like me to sort of understand how come the rest of the state doesn't get to vote. Anyway, the question gets to be, is this what we are about to do, what the legislature had in mind when it passed Act 46? I'm certainly not a mind reader, but virtually every community, did the legislature have it in mind that virtually every community's proposal for an alternative governance structure that is possible and practicable will be overruled by this board and replaced by an order to merge? I'm guessing that perhaps the legislature did not intend that, or at least did not foresee it. I think in fairness to the legislature, I think it was very hard to foretell or imagine how this would all play out after the voluntary phases. In any case, we have certainly heard from members of the legislature, many of whom were also candidates at that time, and with few exceptions, they've expressed their surprise and maybe even dismay at the direction that this board has taken the matter. So, as you might imagine, I've been asking myself, and none of you are surprised by this, I've been worrying this question for some time. How did we get to this place where about 30 towns are going to be told, merge, you have no choice? And especially because this is a group of people that I admire and respect and enjoy. And so how did we do this? And I've really been sort of obsessed with that question the last couple of weeks since we last met. So I've sort of tried to, because I wasn't around and frankly wasn't paying much attention 2 and 3 years ago, I went back to sort of read stuff about Act 46, news accounts, the law for the 17th time, and the board's work. And I think that unintentionally, I'm sure, the agency and the board have taken a view of alternative governance structures that I think it would be kind to call it dismissive. I'll give you an example. In July 2016, the board issued guidance to the districts contemplating offering an alternative structure. And the guidance said, quote, an alternative structure is an exception to creation of a preferred unified system. Well, you could say that, but it's really not an exception. It's an alternative, and there's a big difference. And this statement by the board suggests that it regards anything other than the preferred structure to be kind of by definition inadequate. I mean, that's sort of the inference of exception. I mean, if you go to the theater and you don't have your ticket and they let you in anyway, that's an exception. Well, that's inadequate. You didn't pay for a ticket. But if you bring vegetables for the food shelf and that was invited, well, that's an alternative way to do it. And so the legislature in no way implied that the alternative structure is an inadequate approach or an exception. Never used the word. So this is this choice of words by either the agency or certainly the board. The board voted and approved this guidance in July 2016. I don't know who on the board wrote this. But in any case, the board has adopted language which implies that it has to me, a somewhat dismissive attitude toward alternative structures. Doesn't see them as equally valid or even valid as an alternative. Not surprisingly, I think this perspective shows up 2 years later in the Secretary's proposed plan. In 10A, there's a piece of this that Bill has alluded to. The language of 10A says, and this is the direction to the Secretary about how to create a state plan, and it's, I think, the only words for the Secretary about how to do so is 10A. The Secretary shall present to the State Board of Education, this is a quote, a proposed plan that, to the extent necessary to promote the purposes of the Act, would move districts into a more sustainable preferred structures. By my reading, the phrase, to the extent necessary to promote the purposes of the Act, quote unquote, is a prerequisite to making a decision about moving anything into alternative to preferred structures. In other words, you first have to address that question. Is it necessary? Is this HES proposal in front of me sufficient to meet the purposes of the Act? If it's not, great, move on into another structure that the Secretary is satisfied will do so. However, if it does meet the purposes of the Act, then you'd have to say, wait a minute, well, haven't these people achieved what it is the General Assembly asked us to do? Instead, in most cases, the Secretary just never considers that question. And in most cases, she pretty much dismisses districts' proposals for alternative structures simply by saying that they're not preferred structures. Over and over, we hear this language from the Secretary as the rationale for requiring a merger. Absent compelling evidence to the contrary, the Secretary defers to the legislature's determination that a unified district is the structure most likely to meet or exceed the educational and fiscal goals of Act 46 in a sustainable manner. No reference here to the merits or demerits of the proposal in front of the Secretary and that we hopefully have studied. To me, the Secretary's sentence is sort of like saying, I don't like cats because they're not dogs. Like, okay. I think that my concern is that unintentionally there has crept into our work a kind of dismissive quality about districts that are proposing alternate structures. I can't document that to you. I probably could if I had to. You'll have to think about it for yourselves and decide, is that so? Is it true for me? I would say that until I caught myself about this, I tended to have a somewhat dismissive attitude toward the proposals of people far away in small towns that I did not know. I think it's very easy to do that. I'm guilty of it. And to the extent that has colored my understanding of the equities in these proposals, I think that's a concern. So in general, my concern is that I believe that our process has been influenced, tainted is too strong a word, but influenced by a perspective about these towns which from 2 years ago appeared to be dismissive from the language of the board 2 years ago. Let me just conclude. I'm almost there. Thank you. I know that whenever we adopt or do anything as a matter of public policy, there's always unintended consequences. You're always balancing competing and conflicting goals. And this is certainly no different than that. And that's why they pay us the big bucks, of course, is to do this work. And it is our job to think of it as the scales of justice. And on the one side, there's this concern about democracy and stuff like that. And on the other side, there's this concern about making our school systems even more effective by enhancing their governance. I'm very used to kind of gritting my teeth. I'm often in the minority, gritting my teeth and going along with the majority when I think that mostly they got it right. For me, in this case, this is what I would call a bridge too far. There's just too much about this that makes me uneasy. And I think might make us, I think we're all uneasy to varying degrees, as Krista has said. But I would, so as a result of this, I would actually urge us to table the proposal in front of us and double back a little bit. I'm not trying to kill the plan. I'm not trying to starve it or anything like that. there's enough in it that makes me, at least, uncomfortable about how we went about thinking about it and implementing it, that as a matter of conscience, I'm uncomfortable with and can't sign up for. I think we could improve on it. I think we could improve our process. I don't think we would ever have to double back and look at all of these cases by any means, but there may be 10 or 15 that we ought to, in my view, ask our own tough questions. I think we relied excessively on the recommendations of the Secretary and perhaps didn't do enough of our own analysis and homework. And I would just encourage us to step back, bear down real hard for a while, and get this thing done. I grant you it would have an impact on the deadline, but at this point, I don't see a way forward other than that. So thank you for your courtesy and your time.
And let's get some other voices. Oliver? Oh, okay.
He wants the back cleanup.
Yeah, John.
I wasn't going to speak, but, the former speaker took up about half the time, but I would have interrupted him, but he sounded, he was very compelling, and he's always a very smart speaker, which makes it hard to speak after him. I guess I want to address a couple of the points, and again, I wasn't planning to speak. I kind of go back to the president of the School Board Association, and when he came to us, we were meeting in
Hartford.
Hartford, yes, thank you. And the comments that he made, you know, he's a local official. A lot of us are local officials. I'm a local official appointed. And his comments were really sort of formed a lot of the foundation that I was working off of through the process. And it is difficult. You know, there's this group of towns that have said that they don't want to merge. And then there was, you know, and you sort of drill into all these different towns that have either merged or not merged. They don't want to merge. Some people want to merge. Some schools want to merge. You know, and I go back to the Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. So I'll just talk about my experience locally. I come from a region of the state that has a strong reputation for not getting along well between neighboring communities, and we had a process that I think really worked well, and people worked together, and actually that passed. But one of the reasons that it passed, I think that there was, right out in public, there was this argument that I think I support in Act 46. I think it's clear that if communities don't act, that the state may act. And it was right in our town report. I actually read it at a meeting, saying that the reason that we need to act is that if we don't, the state will. So I'm not quite sure how these other communities have come to the realization that if they don't act and they vote down proposals, that they're totally immune. I'm a huge believer in town meeting, but at the same time, the decisions that we make at town meeting is responsible for those outcomes. So if town meeting makes a bad decision, they can't just simply blame somebody else for that decision. So I understand where John's coming from, but at the same time, you know, we have to look at it from the perspective of all these towns. A lot of communities, I'd say a lot more communities, made the decision to merge or do something different. What do we say to them? What's the answer to those communities that actually made tough decisions? And you know, without Act 46, I'll be honest with you, and the Secretary may disagree with me, but I don't think our towns would have merged without some sort of incentive or without some sort of, well, I guess I'd call it carrot and stick. You know, we are the beneficiaries of a carrot, but that would not have happened. You know, the communities that I'm near, Manchester and Dorset, just those two simple communities have talked about merging for decades and have been unable to do it. Now, fast forward ahead, you know, I voted for our local merger, and I'm glad we did because, you know, I have a kid in 7th grade, and I can tell you that her experience in 7th grade is much better than the 9th grader who is now in high school than her experience in 7th grade, partly because of the merger, partly because they're looking at a much bigger system. We don't have a regional middle school. We still continue to operate middle schools we're sharing staff, we're sharing curriculum, we're sharing bus routes. Students have choice. You know, some of the kids that were on my middle school soccer team, one was from Floodbrook, one was from Sunderland, one was from Dorset. This is an opportunity that these kids had to come to a larger school and have different opportunities. So, you know, I keep coming back to this democracy issue, and these towns voted against the merger, but you have to look at it from the other perspective of, you know, that sort of says to the voters of another community, it says to the voters of one town, you know, it may say to them, your vote doesn't count. But on the other hand, it says, you got swindled. You voted for a merger under the pretense that if you didn't vote for the merger, something bad would happen. And now it turns out something bad won't happen.
Well, it looks like something bad is about to happen.
I don't think so, but I'm just saying, like, that's the sort of, I mean, it's easy to look at from one perspective, but from the other perspective, there are tons of communities that went through the process and made tough decisions. And I think that, you know, I think that someone has to stick up for those towns too. And, you know, I echo the comments of the president of the School Board Association, urging us to make tough decisions on Act 46.
Mark.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, John. Well, actually, both your perspectives. And, you know, and I think we do bring a huge amount of perspective to our roles. And that's why we're appointed to this board. We're not political. We're here to cover multiple terms of the political folks that are in Montpelier, whether it be the governor or those in the legislature. You know, having served on school boards for 25 years, both in small districts and SUs and a larger district, my perspective is that Act 46 is about opportunities for kids, plain and simple. And my experience has been that the more fragmented the governance system within your supervisor union structure is, the less chance that opportunity will exist. Act 46, was, you know, right in the very first pages talks about, you know, the findings that got to Act 46. I was involved in discussions with folks around the state, whether it's a VSBA or education initiatives through business, the Business Roundtable, and we need to be a system, and we are a connected system in the state of Vermont. You know, a town is sending money out to the whole state, and it's receiving money in from the whole state. And so we're a larger system. Granted, some people don't like to think of it like that, but that is the reality. And so our role, I believe, has been to do, to the best of our ability, given the way the Act has been written, to look at school systems, smaller ones and larger ones, and are we able to put them together so that ultimately opportunities for students will be there down the road. When we hear about towns that are doing a great job and are defending, you know, what they're doing, which on one hand may seem like, oh, we're doing fine, just keep us the way we are, that's an opportunity for them to join their governance system. We're not asking people to combine schools. We're not asking to send kids to different schools. We're asking the adults in the community to get together as one board. My experience in serving on supervisory union boards and multiple districts within that supervisory is it is much more streamlined, much more effective for all the leaders involved to have a single board. I feel when we start sort of really looking at individual towns and not remembering that they have neighbors that may not be in their supervisory unions, but especially the ones within their supervisory union, that they do have an opportunity to function with each other at a higher level. I believe when the governance system is able to merge and start looking at each town as one in whole instead of their individual towns. We're starting to see evidence where creative solutions are coming about for small schools. I've seen it in and my SU, which turned into an SD, and those challenges aren't going away. These challenges have been around since the mid to late 1990s when our numbers started to drop. So let's remember that this is what we're doing is part of a larger process, which ultimately, I think we all share the vision. Every town, everybody that has any interest at all in education is that we want the ultimate opportunities for all our students in the state of Vermont. And once again, if somebody's doing that well, let's share it. And I think this is the best thing that the legislature could do to try and find a way to, really entice schools to start working together on a governance level at this stage of the game. That's all I have to say for right now.
Okay. Bill and then Peter.
John had mentioned that he didn't have proof or an example. Well, maybe I'll give you an example of John's point. Maybe not. We'll see. Thanks to Tom using this example of Montgomery, a town that we looked at, and the rebuttable assumption. Now, what's a rebuttable assumption? The secretary presumes that a certain model is best, but this must be proven if it's rebutted. In other words, if you raise the challenge, it must be answered. And we, as the appeal body, really have to be the ones who look at that and say, this is correct or this is not correct. And so we have to have some burden of proof. And what's happened here in this process, and it's our fault to some degree, is that we've never asked for the burden of proof. The secretary would come in with a recommendation. I look at Montgomery. The AGS was 84 pages long to continue as an independent school. It addressed each of the 5 goals, which is exactly what is required in Act 46 and Act 49. It has very high test scores with high poverty. The student population is increasing. They did look at their neighboring towns to see if they could make a deal there. And they had 2 negative public votes. And the thing is did we as a board look at the alternate governance structure of Montgomery? The answer is no, we didn't. But the secretary's report claims no facts have been presented. Well, that's on page 166 of your book. But they had 84 pages of carefully documented work. And then the secretary goes on to say, not convincing enough to overturn the legislature's determination. On what grounds do you say that when this proof is there? When you have a rebuttable assumption, you have to have this assumption here, and then the countering facts there. The countering facts were never presented. And so we were working on inadequate information about that when we should have looked at that, and it should have been presented to us. In the proposed board language, quote, the board has carefully considered the arguments and sentiment of the Montgomery School Board and members of the Montgomery community, both as reflected in the proposal going on. The board agrees, however, with the conclusion in the secretary's proposed plan that the best means of meeting Act 46 goals for Montgomery and for the region is to merge the governance. There's not a shred of evidence that is presented that would say this is plan A and this is plan B, and let's compare them. And as the law says in 4 different places, select the best. There's no evidence that that happened. And so and this is repeated 20 or 30 times throughout the book. And you've seen them, you've read them. And so I'm saying maybe we've got a flaw in the process that we need to be looking at. And when I go back and look at those and say, those who didn't file a Section 9 proposal, well, forget them. Those who came to an agreement, well, let's forget them. But that still leaves, I'm estimating, some 15 or so in which it wasn't looked at, in which this kind of presumption was made. And without looking at those fairly and openly, I think we have not done right about this. And if we teach anything to the children, which we've talked about, it should be about doing things right.
Okay, Peter.
I'd like to take a kind of a broader, more historical perspective, and maybe I'll try to do it on my own, but I know Bill would probably add to it. 14 years before Vermont became a state, we had our constitutional convention and drew up a constitution in 1777. And it did speak to education, and education at that point I think was referred to as virtue and whatnot. But it really did see the state having a role in making sure all children had access to education. And this was the basis for the Act 60 in regards to the equity and taxation bill. And I think 46 finally addresses what tries to be best is the equity, so that all children get the equal, or have as much as an equal access to quality education as that we can provide. You know, the state board has been delegated to do this as agents of this. It was the legislature that drew the bill up. And I can tell you, having been in the legislature for 8 years and watched 153 and whatnot, when we talk about carrot and sticks, it wasn't until the sticks came in that this kicked into motion. The volunteer school merger actually didn't go anywhere until there was a date certain for change. And that's what we're up against right now, is this date certain. I've said this before, but there is no final solution to what would be the best education. It's always a work in progress, and I think we've made a very, very sincere and deliberate effort to provide that to our children. We're also, what hasn't really talked about is just demographics. How is this state changing, and what are we doing to make sure that all of our kids get equal access? There's a tremendous difference between one town to the next and what they can provide for their children. And I believe we're trying to address that. If you think about what one district is doing and doing really well, and a neighboring district isn't, why can't we share and learn and just grow together? Another thing that's really concerned me is a lot of these meetings, we've had discussions, and it's been an adult discussion about what we're doing in terms of local control and whatnot, but very little about what from the children's standpoint, the student standpoint, what's in their best interest. And I'll bet you, if you ask them just to, where they would, about schools and whatnot, they would be pretty open to just getting what they might want as the best opportunity, best presentation for education. So I feel very strongly that we're on the right road, and we're trying to do this together in a collaborative, deliberate manner. And it's messy, and it's not making everybody happy. But I am convinced in the future of this state, if we can really provide quality education and make sure our kids get equal access to live and grow and possibly and hopefully live in Vermont, well, then we've done a good job. Thank you.
Stacy.
I'll try to keep this short, just to 2 points. I wanted to respond to the thoughtful comments made, by everybody, but Bill and John, and I do appreciate where you're coming from. I think I heard a little bit of comments of we didn't consider something, or perhaps we didn't do our homework. I just want to put it out there on record that I think, speaking for myself, I think many of us, we've spent hours and hours of our personal time reading Section 9 proposals over and over, reading the law over and over. Krista constantly reminded us of our obligation to read all the emails, read all the comments, read Section 9s, read this binder, go online, read the reports. And I don't want there to be some assumption made by the audience here today or anybody watching that people did not do their homework. Each of you know what you did, but I think that's important to state.
That's fair.
Yeah. Thank you. The other point, I was just thinking about, I like the idea that we're just trying to ask people to enlarge in their circle of how they define community. So for a while, for however many of years, a certain community has been defined by this line. And I think what I'm hearing about in Act 46 is we're just saying, can that line be this line? And when I think about a small example in Burlington, which granted was an SD, but everyone was very wedded to their elementary school. If you lived in this neighborhood, you went to this school. You lived in this neighborhood, you went to this school. And what was happening was a lack of opportunity for kids, incredible poverty in 2 of the schools and not the others. And the conversation was, we should close the schools with the highest poverty and we'll just redistribute those kids. And it took leadership and a brave stance by the superintendent and the other school board members to say, these are all Burlington kids. So we're going to widen our scope. We're going to create magnet schools. And what's happened now, 10 years later, is there's school choice in Burlington. Kids go to all different elementary schools, and it's increased parental investment, not just in the school that's down the street from them, but in the success of all the schools in the community, which means we're caring about the success and the opportunity for all kids. And so when I think about Act 46, that's kind of what I hope is coming, is the idea that we just enlarge our circle so that we're not just thinking about our kids in this group, but our kids in this group, and ultimately that we're thinking about all Vermont kids.
Oliver?
I'm going to try to keep my comments brief, mindful of the time. And I want to start out by recognizing and thanking both John and Bill for their very thoughtful comments. And as I've told John before, a very wise man once reminded me that no momentous decision was ever made by unanimous consent. And along those lines, so I really value your, even though I think you're emerging, clearly emerging as dissenting voices in this process, that dissent, I think, makes the board stronger and strengthens the overall process. That said, I am supportive of the path that we're on for a number of reasons, we received some public comment, and that's the other thing. We've received a tremendous amount of public comment, and that I think has been really helpful for this process. So we received some. I think all of us received some public comment from someone who was asking, questioning, maybe, where we came from, and whether we were familiar with rural communities and familiar with town meeting, and I sort of went through these various points, and I said, yeah, I grew up in Vermont. I grew up in a rural community and went to one of the most impoverished schools, elementary schools in the state of Vermont. Dan knows it well. I've been the moderator of my local town meeting. I am the moderator of our local school, of our regional school district. So these are all issues that are really important to me and actually shape my thinking. And as somebody who grew up in a really very poor town and went to a really impoverished school with very limited opportunities as a kid, I'm thankful for my parents. And I had the good fortune of my parents who, ensured that I had opportunities that I didn't have or I wouldn't have had, and certainly many of my peers didn't have. And that shapes a lot of my thinking. And I go back to the goals of this act, and that is to ensure that we are providing, first and foremost, equitable educational opportunities for our students. And that has become more and more difficult, particularly in rural communities where we've seen overall population decline, particularly with our school-age children. And it's made it really difficult to deliver the kinds of opportunities that a place like Burlington or Brattleboro can deliver because they have the economies of scale. And we've received, and I've certainly received, emails and phone calls from parents, and oftentimes parents of children currently in some of these really small districts. And, I had a conversation with somebody the other day who's afraid to speak because there's so much pressure built up in this local community that, merger is a bad thing. And this parent is afraid to go on record publicly because it is such a small community. But the parent, made the point that, their child is, is a minority in a really small, incredibly small district, and they find that really challenging, not only from the lack of opportunities, but even perhaps more importantly, the lack of social interaction, et cetera. So I just, we have to be mindful that there are a lot of voices who don't have a voice in this process for one reason or another, first and foremost our children. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I feel like I think Stacy's point is well taken. We could all talk about this and reflect on this process and where we've been and where we are at. Overall, I'm very happy with the direction that we're going, and to thinking about creating opportunities for our students, and again, not closing our small schools, but thinking about how we can grow that circle to make sure those schools stay open and to make sure that they are providing the opportunities that we want for all of our students. I think that's what really makes me look forward to is our changing demographics. And I look, so you talk about reading these reports. I used to read them all summer when I put my daughter down for a nap. She slept for 2 hours, and she would cuddle next to me, and I would read Section 9 reports. So, yeah, it's very lovely, bedtime stories. I did not. I would read toddler books and then put her to sleep and then start reading and going over this plan. And what struck me is when I look at my daughter, who's 2 years old, and her age group is the lowest birth rate in the state of Vermont since the Civil War. And I think about what are these conversations going to be in 15 years when we're trying to talk about, we have changing demographics now. It's going to look very different if we do not grow our state. And we're going to have difficult conversations about what opportunities we want to give our students and what we can afford. And I think the Act 46 process, just as Stacy said, enlarging that circle so we can have those conversations with our neighbors and make sure that we continue to provide high-quality education. I've been very excited by some of these reports and people coming forward about what's happening at the schools. I've also been very concerned in some instances in what's happening in schools. And this whole process has been amazingly eye-opening about the variety of education opportunities that we have around the state. And I think this is a step one in a larger process. And this is really just addressing, as Mark said, the governance issue. And then we really need to dive down deep as a board and look at that equity issue and that excellence. So that's what's risen to me. And again, I could go on longer, but I don't think we really have the time where it's appropriate. I think we really have to think as a board, do we agree with the positions that we've taken? And do we want to continue in that path forward? And is this plan something that we want to affirm with the votes that we've taken earlier in this process? So I do think it's time to start thinking about, is there a motion to adopt this order? And what I'm hearing about the plan itself, people maybe have editing issues, but big concepts that maybe should be coming up, and that's where we need to focus. That conversation is 11:40. So just mindful of where we are, and people had asked for this condensed meeting, and interestingly enough, we have the Maple Run chorus singers from students from that are all around Maple Run, not just one school, coming and presenting to us. So, did you? Oh, Bill.
1 minute's all I'll take here. I didn't intend to say that people were not working well. I think people worked very, very hard. You people have put in literally days on this kind of stuff. I know I have. But the timelines that were put in the law made it almost impossible to give it the kind of concentration and the sequencing that was necessary. I do care very much about the small rural schools. It's the best way of dealing with socioeconomic issues that we have. And if we take away from that, we're taking something very important away. So we have to be cognizant of that implication. And one thing I found very valuable about this process is our chance to work together and to visit the schools in the state. And I was struck by some schools are doing magnificent jobs, and others are not doing so well at all. And we need to deal with that question of those schools that are not dealing well and take care of that. And for this, we'll give it to Dan French to resolve that problem.
Okay, so the problem in front of us, though, is this November 30th deadline. And do we?
So so we can get this on the
Yeah.
table, I'd like to offer a motion, if I may, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm.
So I move that the board adopt the final report and decisions in order as presented to this meeting, November 28th, 2018, with all edits made during the course of the meeting, including, 1, each and every decision therein affecting any school district in the state, 2, the default articles of agreement contained therein, and 3, the order therein issued pursuant to Act 46, Section 10B.
Seconded by Mark. So we have the motion by Oliver, seconded by Mark. Yes.
A question
Oh,
procedurally?
yeah, sorry, yeah, sorry.
There's a third page here, which is
Yeah.
called Motion to Adopt Order. I don't quite understand what that does, and do we need to be doing both at the same time, or just a procedural question?
Right. And so, Tom, do you want to just help us out?
Because we already adopted the default articles of
Yep,
agreement.
we already did the default articles of agreement.
Yeah, the four motions were sort of a menu of options for the board to consider. What has just been moved is sort of the consolidated version, which covers the report and its decisions, the default articles, and the order. If you've already voted on the default articles, then that could be stripped out. There's also a motion to authorize non-substantive edits of the report to be completed by the end of this week.
So I think the first one is appropriate, even though it's a little redundant, because
Yeah.
it covers
Covers everything.
it covers the default article. I don't like the one on page 3, because that's only the order, whereas the
Right.
first one is the final report of decisions and the order.
Right.
Assumes the order and the default article.
Exactly, yeah.
Can we just go double back for a moment, though, to further edits? Adam?
Yes.
In fairness, it doesn't seem like the board's had a chance to complete its review of this document. And I just would think that, how are we going to get that done?
So I guess that's what this board decides to do. But it could be, what this is asking for, I think there's another motion that could be made that is allowing edits, just not content, like
Yep.
content edits, but technical, just corrections to be made. And so we could vote to do that. I think we have also warned a meeting for Friday in case if anything came up while we were doing this report, that we could potentially have that meeting to address any of those issues.
And any substantive changes we would move an amendment to this.
Right.
Chris, can I?
Yeah,
can
sure,
I ask
John.
that when a vote's taken, it's been taken by a roll call, though?
Yes.
Given the
Yeah.
gravity
Oh,
of
no,
the vote?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Maureen already has that ready for us.
Okay, thank you.
So just, we do have a motion on the table.
Yep.
So just, which needs to be seconded, just,
It was.
oh, it
by
was, I'm
Mark.
sorry.
Yep.
Okay, got it, okay.
Seconded by Mark.
So we're in discussion now, okay,
Yep.
good. So I think, just to be clear, so any substantive changes will require a motion to amend this. And then I think we can have a separate conversation around a motion to authorize the chair to make non-substantive edits.
So, I mean, all in favor of getting on with the vote.
Yep.
But I wonder if we have until 12:30, do we, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Well, this is now, I think, the time to go through the remaining
Yeah,
sections.
okay.
Yes.
That's what I'm
Exactly,
hoping
yes.
is we can
Yeah,
wrap up
'cause-
so that
Exactly.
we have very few substantive
Right.
adjustments to make at a later time.
Yep.
So if you want to, the board stopped really looking at, once we were in pages 12 to 15 at last. the last time we were going through the report. Yes, Stacy.
Just one.
Yep, and
Just
what
one
page?
wordsmithing thing, top of 15, first paragraph. I just would like to remove the word passionately. So just that community members oppose the secretary's proposal. I think
Yes.
everyone was fairly passionate. I don't think we need to quantify.
Yep. No, good catch, thank you.
Yeah, we want to be
We're
dispassionate
malignant,
in our
so we don't
reporting.
catch.
We all
Yeah.
feel our feelings very strongly.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I've got something flagged in the middle of page 18, if we're up to that, or
Okay.
when we get to that.
All right, and what's on page 18?
It's shown in the margin there, the vertical line. I wanted to get some level of comfort or confirmation about the larger systems comment in there.
I'm just not seeing it in the, so where, could you,
Right here.
The marginal mark.
oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
No.
Other side, other side, other side, right here, that vertical line, sorry.
Sorry, I think.
In parentheses.
I think that was reflected in a comment or board discussion, and that's where it came from. I just wanted to,
Would it be
Check in
sufficient to
on it.
remove the parenthetical comment and just continue on?
I agree.
Yeah, 'cause
That's interesting.
there may be a question about what larger means.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would concur with John. Keep it simple.
Madam Chair, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I missed the beat.
Yeah,
Back on page 15, right
Yep.
below where we excise the word passionately,
yep,
the next sentence says that the board agrees with the Secretary's findings and rationale, and with her conclusion that the WESD and its community members did not make a compelling case sufficient to justify. It seems that as a matter of courtesy, we might take the word compelling out of there and simply say did not make a case sufficient to justify.
yep.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And there's just another one, it refers to her, the use of the pronoun her, and I think we wanted to try to keep gender neutral if there's a way to do that in the final.
For secretary.
Just the
secretary.
secretary, yeah.
Okay. Her.
We're doing adverbs at top page of 19, first paragraph. Board concluded, however, that tools available to the board in Act 46 unfortunately do not, should we just delete unfortunately?
Sure, yes. And Tom, was that unflagged on 19? Did that need any, on page 19? There was a margin, right, where it says accordingly, the board confirms. Was there anything needed there?
No, that was just
Oh, okay, just for those.
making meeting plural and
Okay.
changing the definite article from singular to plural. I don't want to jump ahead. I do have something on page 24. There's some highlighted language there that I wanted, again, confirmation or comfort on.
Because I want to talk on 23 before we get to 24, if you don't mind. Because I'd actually like to offer a motion to amend on the Morristown and Stowe district.
So are you making amendment to the motion right now?
Yep.
And so do you want to
Yeah,
make
unless,
that?
I don't want to, if anybody else has anything up through page 23, I don't want to.
We can always go back and
Okay.
look at those things. So do you
Yeah.
want to make a motion?
Yeah, so I would move to amend the report with respect to the Elmore, Morristown, and Stowe districts, Secretary's proposal number 26, to affirm the Secretary's recommendation.
The Secretary's original
Or
recommendation?
The Secretary's original recommendation.
And can you maybe just clarify found in the June 1st?
Oh, in the June 1st proposed statewide plan.
The second?
Yep. So second, John? So I'm going to move to amend the report with respect to EMU and Stowe's district to affirm the original rationale found in the June 1st.
Original rationale and decision, yep.
There would need to be, whether or not some editorial corrections.
Correct, yes.
On the succeeding page.
Yep.
Right.
With necessary editorial corrections, and obviously it would need to move to a different section.
Okay, so we have that on the table. Oliver made a motion and seconded by John. Discussion. Bill?
Why?
Oliver?
Yeah, so there are a number of reasons, and I'll first say, there have been a number of, I've been in the minority on a number of the provisional decisions with respect to mergers for a variety of reasons, but I've, from the get-go and increasingly, have felt that Morristown and the Morristown and Stowe districts have made a very compelling case to remain as distinct units for a number of reasons. One is, unlike many of these other districts that we're looking at, they each have sufficient scale, in my view, and they have demonstrated through very compelling testimony and evidence that they are not only meeting the goals of the law, but that their current structure actually allows them to meet those goals. And in addition to that, they've demonstrated a real commitment to continuing to meet and to improve upon those efforts. We've of all of the feedback that we've received from across the state from various districts, their presentations, both before the board in person as well as their supplemental information, I found to be absolutely the most compelling. Their Section 9 proposal was very clear and very focused on the goals of the law. So this is one I feel quite strongly about. And again, it goes back to the scale. If you look at Morristown, they're almost at 900. These are not small districts. I think they're working well together and even independently, Morristown is almost at the scale where it could even be an SD. So I think for all of those reasons, and I'm really concerned about the capital needs of both districts and the dynamic that would actually result. I'm really concerned about Morristown because of the capital needs, particularly in Stowe. You know, Morristown is looking, they go from working really well together and having a good arrangement to one where these capital needs are going to put them in sort of an adversarial type of situation, and that really concerns me because the students end up losing out there.
That raises the question about why not Montgomery, why not Irisburg, which has two K-12 districts, and the often stated thing is that if we begin to start changing them one off, then there's no end to that. And I would actually like to go back and look at about 15 of them.
Well, I think what you mean is Enosburg and Richford. Those
Thank
are two K through 12s with roughly the same population of roughly the same population and scale. Mark?
Yeah, I appreciate, Oliver, what you had to say, because I would agree with most of that, but I get a different result with it. The more I heard of how well they work together, the more I couldn't find a reason why they shouldn't be part of a preferred structure. In terms of their capital projects, I have the same concern for Morristown as you stated, and I feel as though under a merged governance structure, I think the creativity and the ability to look at both of their communities, maybe the combined capital projects could actually be less than what it is when they take into consideration two school districts and the assets in those districts. So I think the more information we got, it actually compelled me to hold firm to my original vote on that.
I think Callahan wants to say something.
Oh, hold on, and we'll get, we have a couple.
1 second, Callahan.
Yeah, so I also did a lot more digging, Mark, afterwards too, and I even went into graduation requirements and how are they following EQS, because that wasn't presented. And this idea that they do have a common vision, so they have the same graduation requirements for the two high schools. They're achieving it in different ways, but they have the same outcomes. And I also was struggling to find if they have come together and worked together or something like that. This idea that the graduation requirements, the end goal that they both share for both districts, what is the advantage of being separate? And it's then working harder to try to get to that goal. So that's why I was also digging deeper and didn't find compelling reasons why they should be separate. Stacy and then Callahan?
I was just going to briefly comment that I felt like this was one of the places where we received more email than usual praising the decision that we made. And whereas normally we hear where people are unhappy with the decision, this was one where I felt like we did have several voices saying thank you for your courage in that vote.
And we want to make sure, can you put it to the microphone?
Callahan, can you, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. I would just like to say that I second Oliver when it comes to the Stowe-Enosburg merger. I just feel that through their testimony, they've given us every reason that they are following Act 46, and I feel that a merger at this time would not enforce the goals of Act 46. So I just thought I'd give my little input on that.
Can someone restate what she said? Just I couldn't hear.
Couldn't understand.
Sorry.
Yeah, do you want to do it? You were right there.
Yeah, I'll attempt to replay that. So what I think I heard Callahan saying is that she found their testimony to be very compelling, and that they are meeting the goals of Act 46.
Okay, John.
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be affiliated with our student member, our very, I think, courageous and capable student member. We have two of them. And I wanted to say to my friend from Goshen that let us not make the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I spoke about a bridge too far. This helps to shorten the bridge a bit. And I completely support the idea of recognizing the really subtle complexities of this situation. I think Elmore has been stressed by the merger that it voluntarily entered into with Morristown, happily engaged, no doubt, but I think it's created challenges for Elmore. And I think the concern is that to compound that with another cycle of mergers creates a terrific amount of uncertainty and an inequitable distribution of burdens. So I completely support this proposal and hope we can get it passed this time.
I think this is originally when we even brought this up, it was odd in the secretary's report because you're saying there it would be too much to merge here because of past mergers. But when you look at Blue Mountain, it was Blue Mountain went from an SU down to a district within a larger SU and said, no, the secretary said they should continue to merge. So to me, this was one of the big areas of the report where I found it was disconnected from other decisions. I thought it was very disconnected, again, from Enosburg and Richford, that they are just neighbors to the north, similar situation. And again, the Stowe proposal was compelling in sort of putting a monument to the past of what they've done and what they've been able to achieve, but I didn't see a clear vision about how that separate structure was going to help them get to some of those goals. I didn't see it. Oliver.
And I hear the word Stowe a lot, but I actually I'm less concerned with Stowe, and I'm more concerned with Morristown and Elmore, and I really think that they are going to be they're really going to be challenged in this merger situation, and particularly, I think the argument's been made that there's already on the the Morristown, Elmore side, there's already been one tax increase, and then they'd be looking at yet another tax increase. So there seems to be something a little sort of perverse about that. So and we heard testimony, Elmore already struggles a little bit, to pass, large spending decisions. And I think this really just sort of, I go back to Mark's point, yeah, there's a great working relationship because it's structured right. And I worry that this shift in the structure is going to create a financial imbalance that's going to throw, there isn't a wound, but if there were, we'd be throwing salt in it. And I'm really worried about folks in those two communities, specifically Morristown and Elmore.
Bill.
Again, if we open this up at this point in the game, we're opening it up for the entire class of similar situated schools. And we're going to hear about that if we do, most assuredly. And in terms of the debt disparity, you're absolutely right, and that exists in a number of proposals that we have seen. We've talked about that around this table, and I have suggested that this be given back to the legislature, and not timidly, but say, this is a problem that if you want this consolidation to work, you're going to have to deal with this debt issue. And I think it's a statewide problem that needs to be resolved at a state level.
Kristen, can we have a roll call vote on this, please?
Sure. So on this amendment. Are people ready for?
I wasn't trying to push the vote.
Yeah, but are people ready? Okay. So we can start with yay or nay, Callahan. And let me just go this. The motion was to amend the report to repeal, I'm trying to read my writing now. Move to amend the report with respect to Emu and Stowe districts to affirm the original Secretary's decision found on the June 1st report. So if you're in favor of that motion, it's a yay. If you oppose, it's a nay. So Callahan, yay or nay?
Can Oliver just repeat the motion? I can't hear very well.
Yeah, okay, sorry, Callahan. So the motion,
Okay.
the motion is to amend the report to, can you play, sorry.
Yeah, so do you want to just hand it to
Yeah,
me?
here, we'll give it to, there we go, that'll be better.
Yeah. The motion again was to amend the report with respect to Emu and Stowe districts to affirm the original Secretary's decision found in the June 1st report, and then with necessary editorial commentary for this.
So voting yes if we cannot merge?
It doesn't have anything to do with merging.
It's about the report. So right now, the report has them merging, so this would be amending it to the original secretary's position, and the original secretary's position was not to merge.
Okay.
So, yay or nay?
Yay.
John Carroll.
Yay.
Bill Mathis.
Nay.
John O'Keefe.
Pass. Come back to me.
Abs-
Still thinking.
You're still thinking, okay. Oliver Olson.
Aye.
Peter Peltz.
Nay.
Mark Perrin.
Nay.
Stacy. John.
Yay.
Okay, so that is 4 and 4. And again, I vote nay.
Yep.
So that did not, the motion did not pass. All right.
Can I make a comment?
You sure?
So I represented Elmore and Morristown, and I'm very familiar with Moyle South, and I just want to say, I think they're very resourceful, I think they're very strong, and I think they will work this out. One of the most impressive things is the quality of leadership in the central office all the way down through the schools. They've been there a long time, and there's a good history there, and I think things will work out.
All right, so moving on with the report. We have a motion on the table that was an amendment to change the report. So we have a motion still on the table. And other areas that people wanted to review from the actual plan. And Tom, is there areas that you should flag for us?
Yeah, there's one toward the top of page 24. There's a highlighted sentence there. And I just wanted confirmation on that.
I would delete it.
So what would you like?
I think it could be deleted.
Delete it? So if we delete that, and then I think we do need to add to the end of this, though, our discussion today in November 28th meeting. So at the end, it says confirms, so I think it needs to add the discussion for November 28th.
Just by reference to the date of this meeting or to anything in particular about the content of the discussions today?
So is there anything about the content that people would like to put in? I don't think anything else added. Other areas of the report that we should be flagged to?
On page 26, Tom, midway in the page, there's a page 101 in parentheses. I'm not sure just what, is that just a vestige from a cut and paste, or?
That's a citation to that indented phrase from the Secretary's proposed plan.
Oh, I see, I see.
Maybe indent that itself might be
Yeah.
easier to read.
Yeah, okay.
Page 28, we're going to do this today.
Sorry, on page what?
28, yeah, it's highlighted.
On 28. Okay. So on the 28th.
What was that on 28? John, could you get your mic down?
Page 28, replace 30 with 28. November 30th you have, assuming that we would meet on Friday, but it sounds like we'll do it today. Yeah. It's highlighted.
On page 28, toward the bottom, there is a comment in the margin that is not a matter of substance, and I think that Donna and I can work out the extent to which that can be folded in there. The draft currently says early reports, and if we have a specific report, we could make at least reference to that.
Maybe even early reports and testimony to this board, because we have taken testimony as a board.
Yep. Yeah, I think back to the Mill River testimony we heard is a great example.
Or even when this Maple Run came and saw us in Kingdom East.
Yeah.
Talking about.
All of those were very good. ACSD when they were at the State House.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess if I could bring your attention to 29, the next steps, we got sort of conflicting feedback on this one, and putting it as a form of questions to the legislature. So next step, the board notes that ultimately authority to determine the school district merger outcomes belong to the General Assembly. If the General Assembly disagrees with the board's decisions or interpretations of the law or both, then it can redirect the board, change the law, or make its own merger decisions. The board looks forward to working with the legislator and offers the following questions to consider. And so it was a compromise from kind of different competing ideas of some people wanting more statements and some people wanting to make sure that we were knowing that there were, acknowledging that there were areas to work on. So that was sort of the compromise, and does that meet the needs of people around the table?
Shouldn't this be a separate document?
So that's what we put it in just as next steps because report, because it is the official,
All the work that's gone into it so far, but.
yeah. Bill?
I fall into the camp of making declarative statements as opposed to questions. And give the example of the bonded indebtedness thing that we've just discussed. We should say, legislature, this is a problem, it needs to be looked at, and we kindly request that you give attention to it.
I think this is where the tension, if you want to speak to the other side of the tension.
Yeah, I think this strikes a good balance. It raises the issues without making definitive. I think we're better off not making definitive statements.
Definitive statements may be another document, to John's point.
Yeah.
That
Well,
this
if
raises
they-
the concern.
If they are, which is another issue, I think we ought to do it.
So, I mean, I like the idea of putting it into a separate document, but at the same time, I like the questions better. When I worked in legislation, we used to talk about lobbing grenades into each other's foxholes, that when somebody threw one in your foxhole, you pick it up quickly and throw it back into theirs. I think if we put this in the form of statements rather than questions, I think it looks like we're lobbing grenades back, that we're picking up their grenades and throwing them back in their foxhole. And I think this,
I like that analogy, yeah.
with no helmets to jump on.
Of education reform.
Yeah, it is. So I think the questions make it look like we're just posing questions rather than picking up grenades and throwing them back.
Okay, you take it. John?
Did you make reference to a separate document?
No, John was saying that maybe there should be a separate document, and then Bill was saying that we should have longer statements. I said, well, maybe that would be a second document, that would be another conversation in a following meeting. Do we want to follow it up with more declarative statements later? But for this report, is it suffice to have raised the concerns? These are concerns we have. We're not offering the answers yet.
Can we put that on next month's agenda?
Yeah, we could. We have a lot of cleanup to do, but yes, we will do that. Stacy, and then?
I can probably live with it either way, but I think the problem with the questions, I think it implies that we went ahead and made decisions without knowing our answers to those questions. And I think that, I think we did make some decisions, like for instance, when are short-term differing levels of indebtedness, when are they too great to prevent a merger that is otherwise possible? I think we wrestled with that and then voted. We came to certain conclusions on that. So I guess my hesitancy about phrasing it as a question, it just looks like we ourselves don't know the answer, where I think we by voting had answers. I'd feel a little more comfortable if it said, these were things that we wrestled with and the legislature might want to turn up. Bullet, different levels of indebtedness, period.
Yeah, I like that.
And not as a
Or
question.
we couldn't resolve ourselves, it was beyond our purview or whatever.
I wouldn't say that. I like exactly what Stacy just said.
That's what it's.
So wrestled with, and then so we have the indebtedness. And then the timeline. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep.
So
So not-
timeline
maybe it's not a question or a declarative statement, but more topics.
that we
bulleted
struggled with.
Topics that created, that
Yep.
led to questions that we think the legislature might want to
May
consider.
want, yeah. yeah.
So just so we can get this down, so we have indebtedness, timeline,
Resources.
resources,
I think all the bullets here, we just need to rephrase them.
just rephrase them.
Yeah.
Okay. John, yeah.
Yeah, I think the original draft that I gave you does exactly that. It sort of says, in the course of our work, we've encountered some possible topics for you to take up.
Yep.
And listed them. I'm uneasy with the introductory paragraph that says, notes to the ultimate authority, if the General Assembly disagrees. Why do we say that? It's all perfectly obvious that the General Assembly can do as it darn well pleases. And it sort of seems like we're sort of inviting them to disagree, and we can redirect the board. I don't think we need to even talk about all that. We've done what we were asked to do. Issue a state plan with orders, end of discussion for us, and by the way, you'll find that there are these pending concerns that might need your attention. So I guess I'm just uneasy with, it seems presumptuous for us to tell the legislature what authorities it has. It knows what it's
Yeah,
supposed to.
Oliver.
I'm going to disagree, and I do think it's important to put in there precisely because we have had legislators come before us and question our authority under the law with respect to this process. And I think it's really important to point out that the legislature actually is the supreme authority, and if they, this is a way of saying, for folks who are dissatisfied with the actions we've taken, or don't feel that we have the authority, et cetera, it's a reminder that actually, if you don't like what we've done, as a legislator, you have the power to introduce a bill and move it through all stages of passage to do something different.
Yeah, it's sort of like saying, well, if we didn't get it right, you can clean it up. I just don't feel very comfortable with that.
So, anybody else on board? Mark?
Well, I don't know, I kind of want to hear them keep going back and forth because I'm just kind of sitting on the fence on that one.
Well, you're on my side of the room.
Uh-oh, that was a mistake putting you two next to each other.
Can I
yeah.
stop and clarify? I mean, maybe rather
Sure.
than getting specific about, or both, then it can redirect the board, change the law, or make its own merger decisions. I'd say, that instead of that, I'd just say, or it could intervene in any way it chooses. I mean, this seems to list out a menu of options.
Maybe we can put in parentheses at the end, no offense intended.
Yeah.
Or do you keep the, so here's my question, is this kind of the compromise? Do you keep the first and the last sentence? So the board notes the ultimate authority to determine the school district merger outcomes belongs with the General Assembly. Skip that whole next sentence. The board looks forward to working with the legislator and offers the following, or change it to what Stacy said, like these are things we wrestled with and we look forward. I mean, is that kind of the compromise in the middle? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the middle language. It just seems like
Yeah,
it's just
so
too
let's
menu.
get rid of
Get
rid of the middle language. Is that kind of meeting in the middle?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we go back to page 28, just in conclusions and what or in
Yep.
Before we do it, did we resolve that paragraph?
Synthesizer.
I think so. Yes, so what I resolved it is the first and the last, and then we're using what Stacy said, that, that possible topics, or things that we wrestled with, the language in that, but taking all of those bullets and change those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Further on this, one
Yeah.
last thing.
Yes.
I had imagined, silly me, that this would be early in the document, like in the cover letter or the executive summary. It just felt to me like we wanted to say, we've done our best. We think this is all good, but there are some loose ends that may come up for the General Assembly, and that we ought to say that early. This, I think, is I mean, it's okay here, but why not say it in the cover letter from the chair to whoever you're sending this to, or something? Just feels like,
Well, I'm talking to them at 2:30. Do you want me to lead with that?
I would, that would be the first sentence out of my mouth, yeah.
Okay.
But anyway.
But
so-
you are talking.
So the question gets to be, yeah. Yeah. So the question gets to be, though, should this be, what's the 1-minute version of this document? Because frankly, that's all it's going to get from some people.
Well, before we get to the 1-minute version, just in the interest of time, let's get to the full version. Bill, did you have
I had cut Peter off from saying something about on page 28.
Oh,
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see some numbers, because this is the first time I've seen, the result of what was done in terms of numbers. But there are these boxes, are these things that we have to address, or?
just confirming the districts once
Yeah.
everything,
So-
making sure the numbers.
Are correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see those numbers as soon as we can.
Bill?
Another vehicle, I think that it does need to be put into a list. I do like the list idea. And just remember that next month, we need to put our legislative agenda together. By law, we are told that we are supposed to advise the legislature and the governor, and we should take advantage of that responsibility to bring our issues forward.
All right, anything else on the report itself?
I'd actually offer just one thing, just at the end, and I think I'm a novice pizza maker. Mark is a professional, and I think we're starting to overwork the dough here a little bit, but I'll offer this one last piece.
Okay, what page?
The last piece, actually, this is where it says City of St. Albans. I think we should put BFA before that, because we're at school.
Okay.
What page?
Right at the end where it says duly warned and held in the City of St. Albans. I think before City of St. Albans, we should put BFA.
Okay.
It's very simple, but I
Yeah.
think that since we're here, we should document where we actually did it.
Right, okay. John?
It says final decision, the topic under conclusions is A, final decisions and summary of districts created
Oh,
and
what page?
dissolved.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at page 28. There's a reference to a list of summary of districts created and dissolved. I see the list of districts created. Am I missing the list of districts that have been dissolved?
I think someone says like reduction of
And
districts.
Tom, any?
A net reduction of 156 school
No,
districts.
but it's not a list of the districts dissolved.
Oh, list.
There's a whole bunch of, see that? Just as we described the creation, for example,
Right.
of the Barry UUSD, probably we should be announcing the dissolution of the Barry Town School Board and the Barry City School.
But you're looking for a total statewide number.
I'm not looking for a total, I'm looking for an enumeration. I think towns need to be put on notice that their school district, their municipal entity called the school district is being terminated
Donna?
Or enlarged.
or recreated, reinvented.
I've been this is Donna Russo Savage again from the agency. I've been keeping a spreadsheet, and that's where a lot of these numbers have come from, that identifies, which districts are merged, which districts stay the same, which towns, when there were votes, what the votes were, number of students in those districts. It's been keeping track of a lot of different things. There is an appendix at the end that's been identified as data. It's just that's all it is. I don't know if you would like to use some of the information in that spreadsheet I've been keeping for the data, or if you all had something else in mind. If there are certain items that you'd like to have pulled together, we could create some sort of an Appendix A for you if you would like it.
Well, I'm asking
Yeah.
for not a summary.
It's not a summary, it's a spreadsheet
list.
that lists,
Yeah.
it has every school district listed, and then, whether it's a town also, or whether it's like a Union School District doesn't have the town listed, but it gives that information. I can show it to you,
So we're saying attach that as an addendum?
I don't believe you changed
Yeah,
any
it's under,
details today?
Oh, okay,
Did
yeah, I
you?
see.
No, okay. Decisions, I mean.
Okay.
So I don't, I prepared it because I knew that we would be asked, but the agency would be asked. But if it is useful to you to use in some way, we can help you use
So
it.
underneath the data section.
And we also have some ghost districts that we might want to enumerate, right?
Well, they're listed, for example, I'm trying to think of who is truly a ghost district, because as it turns out, even though Greensboro should be a ghost district, it actually exists for the purpose of paying tuition for pre-K. I can't think if there are, and so that is on the list as a dissolved district. I can't recall if there are any others.
I wonder if we're talking about two different things. One is an interest in the data, like what's happened. The other is, sounded to Mr. Carroll's point about notifying people. I think the notice piece takes place in the Articles of Agreement. That's very explicit. And so, that part, I feel comfortable. I'm just steering the board towards maybe not encumbering the order with the data piece per se, but just doing that as a consumption for your own information and maybe publishing it under some other place. But I think if the notice is what you're after, I think that's taken care of, I would argue, through the articles.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that if you're going to take 3 districts and merge them into one new district, and we have a paragraph designating that, why doesn't the paragraph include a sentence that says, accordingly, the following 3 districts are disbanded? And listing them in the paragraph associated with the creation of the new district. It just seems like it's real straightforward, and it's telling it like it is.
So would you add that as we have instead of having, you would have A, final decisions and summary districts created, and then add a section, I guess these next steps, but maybe B is a final decision of districts dissolved.
I would do it in the order, under B sub V, State Board of Education's order, and therefore, then you list 1 is Brattleboro School District. What I'm suggesting is that it should, in that section 1 about that district, it should not only say who's now in this new entity, but it also should say, and these former entities are dissolved.
And elements is for where to put this in the report.
Just put it with the creation of a new entity and the disappearance.
Yeah, I see what John is
I think it's a good suggestion.
In the actual,
It's just a logical place for it.
So the last one in each order would just say,
the last in each order.
as of
Okay.
July 1st, the following districts are dissolved.
It's dissolved.
And we
Okay,
already have
so
the date,
adding
it's
that
easy
to the order.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
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 Yeah, that can be added. I'm just thinking, because there is that provision about keeping them operational for a certain length of time, do you feel okay, instead of saying dissolve on July 1st, say dissolve pursuant to the Articles of Agreement?
Well, the Articles of Agreement talk about when that happens, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay, yep,
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
All right.
Got it.
All right. I am looking at Kevin, who I'm sure, is there children in the hallway? Nope, not yet. Okay. Downstairs. Okay. You don't want to be. So is there anything, we have a motion on the table.
Yep.
And do people want to keep going through, or are people ready for a vote?
And I just want to make sure, I'm not, that we closed out that discussion of, in the conclusion, so we're good with the conclusion, we just struck that second sentence.
Yes.
And we converted the questions into, okay.
Into
Yep,
statements.
okay,
Yep.
good.
The whole spectrum?
All right.
Okay.
So it was requested for a roll call, and I definitely think that's appropriate at this time. Do we have Callahan on the phone?
Callahan, you ready for the big vote?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to read Oliver's original motion, where it says that I move that the board adopt the final reports of decisions and orders as presented to this meeting, November 28th, 2018, with all edits made during this course of the meeting, including each and every decision therein affecting any school district in the state.
the default articles of agreement contained therein, and the article therein issued pursuant to Act 46, Section 10. So we're going to do roll call. Callahan, yay or nay?
Yay.
John Carroll.
Nay.
Bill Mathis. John O'Keefe.
Yay.
Oliver Olson.
Yay.
Peter Peltz.
Yay.
Mark Perrin.
Yay.
Stacy Weinberger.
Yay.
And for the record, I don't usually vote, but I will vote yay. So the ayes have it, and we have adopted a state plan. Knowing that we may need to we have to, by law, have this published on the agency's website by the 30th. So I would look kindly on a motion to allow edits by myself and legal counsel if you'd.
So, Madam Chair, I move that the board authorize its chair, Krista Hewling, acting on advice of the board's legal counsel, Thomas A. Little, Esquire, to make non-substantive edits to the board's final report of decisions in order prior to the close of business on November 30th, 2018.
And seconded by Peter. So, any questions on that? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. And so if anything substantive does come up, that's when we will reserve that meeting for Friday. And if it does come up to call, you can come forward.
Maybe just set a deadline for board members to raise those issues.
Would we be raising them?
Yes, so if there is an issue that is raised, we have to have the meeting by noon. That's when it's warned for.
It's warned, yep.
So I would say 5 o'clock the night before
Yep.
would be appropriate.
So tomorrow at 5, yep.
Tomorrow at 5. I don't think we need one. For any board meeting to happen, 2 board members could request it. So if there's something that comes up, we can call it, and there can always, part of our rules is that 2 board members can always come forward and request it.
Yep.
So with.
So everybody's clear, 5 o'clock tomorrow. If Krista doesn't hear from you, there's no meeting on Friday.
Right, and big substantive changes.
Yeah.
And you'll let us know somewhere around that time?
Yes, and it's warned right now for noon. At this moment, and now did Kevin go off? I think he's, our hosts wanted to end our meeting with the chorus, and it's a Maple Run chorus. And Kevin, did you want to speak to the makeup of the chorus?
I will. We have to do a little bit of a setup because they're on stage.
Oh.
And what we request is your patience a little bit. It's going to take a little bit of a move. We would invite you to come down into the audience with your stuff. We're going to move some tables back, put some risers up. I will then explain.
Okay, great. So we are going to have the chorus, and then we'll come back up here to adjourn. So we need the table still up here.
You want to do that first?
So can we do that adjourn and then do the chorus?
So moved.
Have we completed consent agenda?
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So, but they need to move all the tables. But how about we just do the consent agenda real quick, and then we'll adjourn?
It would probably be better for you.
Yeah.
And our students can wait for you. That's it.
Okay, because they're going to be setting up the whole stage. All right, so, sorry, the consent agenda, we jumped over that. And so moved by Bill. Is there a second? Seconded by John O'Keefe. And I guess the one that we got a public comment that in the minutes it was EMU, and it should be EMUU. So any other changes to that? So with changing the EMUU, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. That's passed. And do we have a motion to adjourn to chorus and lunch? So moved by John Carroll, seconded by Stacy. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Thank you, and let's bring the kids in.